Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Return of Joyboy by TheIntrovertRin. A story in which Luffy is the child of sea. The secrets of Luffy are unveiled slowly, which gives heart attack to people. Member list. Garrick Russell, Warlord. Black Money Young Lion, Warlord. KSG PL4YZ, Warlord. King Nemo, Warlord. Zach Travis, Warlord. Adios.
The world was swimming in a haze of unconsciousness edging to blissful sleep, but it wasn't sleep, as there wasn't the warm feeling that cradled one gently into dreams. No, this was absolute. A void. Because not even silence existed in it. Because this was the absence of everything. As if time itself had been frozen and gutted, as if the laws of sound, sensation, memory and even gravity had been plucked from reality and tossed into a pit. It almost seemed as if there were no heartbeat, no thoughts, no dreams. It was like drowning in static while being swallowed whole by an abyss too ancient and too vast to even comprehend. It almost seemed like the unknown force had taken the occupants of the marine base into a place where minds didn't belong. Where the power to comprehend and analyze lay forgotten. Where returning seemed almost impossible. But something was slicing through the hazy fog like a blade with a single breath. It was a soft exhale, faint but alive, real and warm. It was coming from Luffy, whose body had been lifeless moments ago but now pulsed with a fragile rhythm, his chest rising and falling ever so slightly, with each of his breaths weaving unknown golden threads into the very fabric of the dead air. It wasn't just a breath, at least not the normal one. It was warmth, ancient and divine, trickling out of him like sunlight spilling into a tomb of the realm of unconsciousness. Zoro was the first one to stir, being the closest to Luffy. He was laid out beside his captain when they had all fallen, sprawled in a defensive crouch even in his weakness. His body was the first one to catch the warmth spilling out of Luffy unconsciously. It was seeping into his skin, into his bones, into the place behind his ribs. At first, it was a twitch in Zoro's fingers, then a grunt, before his eyelids fluttered. And the darkness clinging to his mind shattered, leading Zoro to gasp awake. His eyes blinked open slowly, as if dragging themselves out of a muddy swamp. His entire body felt like it had been steamrolled by a ship. The overhead lights of the infirmary were buzzing faintly, blurring and spinning in his vision. His head was throbbing with every beat of his heart, but he forced himself upright, placing one calloused hand on the floor to balance his weight and the other over his pounding skull. What the hell was that? He groaned, his voice gravelly, before the haze began clearing bit by bit. The Haki. The King's Haki. Dominant and pressuring yet not having the familiar warmth, yet not of Luffy's, which had made them all drop like flies. Zoro remembered seeing Chopper and Nami collapse mid-crying, Sanji gripping his head before falling to with tears in his eyes. He had tried to resist, to stay up, to guard, but his body hadn't even had the time to draw his blades. The Haki wave had devoured them whole. Not letting them to check, to guard, to protect. Luffy. The words left his mouth as memories slammed into him with a blinding force. The blood. The denial. The rage. Luffy's tiny body laying still. Cold. Childlike. As if the very essence of joy and life which built him had been drained out of him, as if. Zoro's body moved before his mind could finish the thought, his eyes desperately searching and focusing. Luffy. His voice echoed through the infirmary like a whip crack, filled with true, unfiltered panic carrying desperation. He needed to check on him. Check if he was breathing. Confirm that he hadn't left him, that he hadn't died. But the moment his eyes fell on Luffy's bed, the panic stopped, halted mid-strike, as if time itself was brought to a halt, because there he was, Luffy. Not in the toddler form from earlier. No longer ghost-like, lifeless miniature form they had seen. But himself. The familiar, lanky frame with the mess of black curls still having a little white streaks in it. His straw hat was resting just beside his head on the pillow. He still was thinner than usual, paler than what was normal, but unmistakably Luffy. Zoro stood frozen, staring in disbelief. For a second, he genuinely wondered if he had died and was hallucinating. Because he was breathing. Because Luffy's chest was rising up and down in a slow yet steady rhythm. Because he was alive. Chopper. Chopper. Get the hell up, Zoro bellowed, his voice raw and cracking, almost hoarse with relief, panic and disbelief. Zoro was already moving, stumbling forward, his movements shaky but quickly regaining his strength. But still his knees felt weak and he dropped beside the bed, placing his head against Luffy's warm chest, straining to hear. Dum-dum-da-da, dum-dum-da-da, it was faint, but it was there. Defiant. Alive. Beating that silly, infectious heartbeat of his. Zoro's eyes widened further, his breath hitching. He chuckled under his breath, feeling breathless and slightly manic. Hell, he would definitely go crazy with all the shit and insanity which Luffy keeps dumping on him. He would get gray hairs very soon, with his heart getting attacks, one after another. But the funniest and craziest thing of all was that Zoro didn't even want to exclude this petty nonsense, this craziness from his life ever. Because that would mean no Luffy, and Zoro didn't even want to entertain that thought. He had no direction before, he was aimless, with only a target too far to even comprehend. But now that he has promised to follow Luffy, his captain, he has found the compass of his life. But his sense of ambition and direction would go down the moment he would die. He's breathing. He's actually breathing. He's alive. Zoro was chanting it like a mantra, trying to calm his racing heart that everything was truly fine now. While Chopper, roused by Zoro's yells, drowsy, shot up from where he had slumped over a nearby counter. His fur was puffed in alarm, his hat nearly falling off as he scrambled over in a flurry of limbs. What's going on? Zoro? Chopper's eyes fell on Luffy and his mouth dropped open at the sight. He. Check him, Zoro ordered. Now. Chopper didn't need to be told twice. His hooves were already working, his fingers trembling as he pulled his medical kit toward him, jamming his stethoscope in his ears. He placed the cold disc on Luffy's chest, leaning in. Then he checked the pulse. Then his breathing. Then his pupils, which were still red instead of being brown. Then his temperature, which was slightly more than normal for Luffy, was no longer scorching. He's alive. Chopper whispered, as if saying it too loudly would undo the miracle. His vitals are slightly weak, but consistent. Everything's stabilizing. It's like something in his body's fixing it. On the other side of the bed, Sanji groaned low and dragged a hand across his face, his body still sluggish from the overwhelming haki that had slammed them all to the floor like puppets without strings. The hell? My head feels like it got squashed, he muttered, voice scratchy, but gaining strength by the second. Behind him, Nami let out a sharp inhale, followed by a muffled curse. She sat up in panic, her head whipping toward the source of the noise. Her heart was in a frenzy, galloping in her chest from fear. What happened? Zoro turned, face twisted in emotion. He was clearly struggling to hold back. He's alive. Luffy's alive. What? Nami looked towards Luffy's bed and gasped, hands flying to her mouth and eyes leaking tears. Luffy, she cried, stumbling toward him, knees buckling at the sight. Sanji followed right behind her, as a half-choked, "You better not be playing with us," Merimo dying on his lips the moment he saw Luffy. Warm, breathing, alive. For a second, none of them spoke, taking in the miracle. They just stood over Luffy, all caught in a limbo between disbelief and overwhelming joy. Just the soft beeping of the infirmary machines. The quiet rise and fall of a chest that had stopped moving a moment ago. The soft glow, divine in nature, once again kissing his skin. But still holding that faint, deathly pallor yet containing the undeniable warmth instead of cold. He's really bivered, as she wiped the new onset of tears leaking from her eyes. Yeah, he's weak, but alive. Chopper answered, his eyes blurry and a smile curling on his lips. Still pale as hell, Sanji muttered hoarsely, his voice low and nearly cracking. Face looks like paper. Paper that's been through a goddamn storm. There was no quip, no teasing, no sharp-edged jabs. It was just Sanji, stripped raw by the sheer relief bleeding through every vein in his body. Zoro scoffed, but even that sounded off, like his throat wasn't ready for the hurricane of his own emotions. His hand was still lingering over Luffy's chest, fingers hovering as if afraid that if he let go, the rhythm might stop. "TCH. You're gonna cry, Cook?" Zoro still asked, without looking away from Luffy. Sanji didn't even react with the usual fire in his voice. He just let out a shaky exhale, his hands stuffed into his pockets like he was trying to ground himself. "I already did, didn't you see?" Zoro turned slightly at that, noticing the red-rimmed eyes of Sanji and the genuine relief and hurt in his eyes. He didn't reply soon, letting the silence between them say enough. They weren't exchanging any snide comments. No taunts. Just an understanding that whatever the hell had just happened, Luffy dying even if for a few horrible minutes had scared the absolute shit out of them. "We're not letting that happen again," Zoro answered, stepping back a little to give Nami and Chopper space to cry over Luffy and pester him. He didn't want to let go, but he was okay as long as Luffy was there, breathing and alive. "I'm sick of it though," Sanji's voice cracked as he two-stepped back, joining Zoro in just watching over Luffy from a little distance. "Sick of pretending I'm fine with watching him break every damn time for us. For the crew. For the people who don't deserve it. We keep talking about protecting him, we keep talking about things never repeating, but we let him fry himself like some kind of walking sun until his mortal body gives out." Zoro's fists clenched, as his eyes flickered with guilt he didn't have the words for. He knew that what Sanji was saying was absolutely right. That happens always, even though they have been training harder and harder to protect Luffy, the crew and themselves. But what the damn hell can we do? I don't really have answers, we can just train harder. We can be stronger. But Luffy's always He's always doing everything, trying to shoulder everything on himself. Zoro gritted his teeth, his voice trembling just slightly. He never even says when it hurts. Sanji's shoulders sagged, he can feel the guilt radiating off of Zoro. But it's not your fault, he muttered. But the next time he starts glowing or pulling out some divine nonsense, I swear I'm gonna strap him down and force feed him damn vegetables he so hates. Zoro snorted at that. You really think that'll work? No, Sanji admitted, knowing the dangerous weapon Luffy possesses. His puppy eyes which will never let him feed the damn brat any vegetables. But I'll do it anyway. I'm not losing him, not again, not ever. Zoro nodded. We'll drag him back the next time, even if it means going to the other side. Damn right. Sanji stopped mid-sentence, his eyes snapping to the slight movement. Luffy's fingers curling slightly in the blanket, jerking faintly, of his nose scrunching adorably. He's waking up, Chopper uttered, happiness leaking from his voice. Ood. Zoro froze. Sanji blinked. Nami gasped. Chopper cried. All that from hearing the first words coming from Luffy's mouth. Luffy stirred, just barely. His fingers twitched again before curling slowly into a fist, as the faintest of groans left his lips, hoarse and cracked like it hadn't been used in days. Although his eyes didn't open fully, as it just barely fluttered weakly, he looked far better than lying still. Zar. He mumbled, voice slurred and small, in M.I.G. per. Zoro, Sanji, Nami and Chopper could feel their eyes welling up at that. So bright. Head feels all floaty. Luffy whined, his words tumbling like half-baked thoughts mixed with the slurry waves of his voice. While out here. Sanji walked forward, kneeling beside the bed again, his eyebrows scrunching and his voice going impossibly gentle as he caressed one of Luffy's hands. You little dumbass, he whispered. You scared the crap out of us. Sri, Luffy's eyes barely opened, letting the peeking slits of red beneath the heavy lids appear for a moment. His gaze was unfocused, like he was still trying to catch up with reality, but he still smiled, soft, small but real. I wanted to come back, he slurred slowly, his words tumbling out, unsteady and soft. I tried hard. Zoro's breath hitched as he moved closer on instinct, wanting to comfort Luffy, tell him that it's alright now, to hug him, but the wires attached to him scared him. He didn't want to mess up anything now that Luffy's back to him. But T was all wrong, Luffy continued, as if talking was taking a lot of him right now. So hazy. Couldn't see nothing, like I was swimming in clouds but with no warmth, so cold, lost. Chopper's ears lowered, his eyes went wide, as his heart felt like shattering into pieces. He hadn't been able to help Luffy at all. His treatments hadn't done anything. Like a bad dream, except I knew I couldn't wake up. He mumbled, his brows twitching with effort. There was no sky, no wind, no sun, just empty. His voice cracked at that, and for a moment, the entire infirmary went silent. Even the machine seemed to dim in the face of what Luffy had just whispered. No sun. Chopper's hooves clenched tighter around his stethoscope, his ears sticking to his head. Sanji's hand stilling over Luffy's, trembling. Nami's breath caught in her throat. And Zoro froze. Because for someone who was the sun god, the idea of Luffy Nika being in a place where even his light didn't reach was terrifying beyond words. But then, he whispered, barely audible, something warm. It hugged me. His eyes glossed over with tears, his mouth trembling with emotion. He didn't have the energy to understand. It was, Carrie. I didn't want to leave. He hiccuped on the words. But the light, filled with love, it showed me the way back. His lips trembled again. I came back, 'cause I didn't want to leave. I wanted to see you all again, wanted to stay a bit longer. Nami let out a soft sob, her face crumbling as she covered her mouth with her arms. Her shoulders were shaking, her heart torn between crying and screaming. She had wanted to scold him for scaring her so much, but now she couldn't. Not with the way he looked like. So small, so tired, so honest, so scared. We were so worried about you, idiot, Zoro uttered, choking back his emotions. Sanji wiped his tears, his heart heavy with emotions. Welcome back, you dumbass. Please, don't ever scare us this way, Nami cried, brushing away her tears. Thank you for coming back, Chopper whimpered, furiously trying to get rid of the fountain of tears leaking from his eyes. Luffy smiled tiredly at his friends before his shaky hands started moving, reaching up to fumble weakly with the oxygen mask over his face, tugging at it. Luffy, wait. No, Chopper squeaked, scrambling forward to grab Luffy's wrist. Why, you still need rest, you shouldn't. Fine, Luffy mumbled. Can't breathe with it on, it's itchy. He scrunched his nose, his eyebrows crossing a little as he tried to tug the mask off again with his shaky hands. Okay, Chopper admitted reluctantly, removing the oxygen mask carefully, knowing that Luffy was okay now despite looking exhausted. But I want to keep it closed just in case. But Luffy was already moving, ignoring Chopper, as he stubbornly tried to rise, pushing his arms against the mattress like a newborn. But why did he not have an ounce of energy in his body? Why did it feel as if he had woken up after sleeping for eons? Why? Interrupting Luffy's thought process as he stepped in to help. He crouched beside the bed, sliding an arm gently behind Luffy's back, to help hoist him into a sitting position. I can do it, Luffy pouted, only for him to flop weakly against Zoro's chest the moment he was left alone for a second. Don't force it, Zoro warned gently. You're still as pale as a ghost. Not, Luffy muttered, half-heartedly, I'm just hungry. Sanji's heart truly couldn't take the sight of Luffy's puppy red eyes looking at him, almost begging him for food. He would have said something along the lines of, don't worry, Sanji-ni's gonna get Luffy-chan lots of food, if he hadn't bitten his inner cheeks on time. It was just too adorable. He truly had thought that he could deal with the puppy eyes attack of his, but them turning red now, it was more devastating than usual. Sanji let out a soft sigh, his hand brushing away his bangs as he tried to compose himself. He tried his best to deviate his eyes from Luffy, whose face was still flushed slightly from his effort, still had that sleepy pout, his red eyes sparkling and practically whiny like a kid denied his candy. Alright, I got ya, Captain, Sanji finally said, his voice softer than usual. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Gonna cook up something warm, something easy for your stomach, okay? Luffy's tired eyes lit up at the mention of food. But Sanji reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, plastic-wrapped energy bar. Until then, munch on this. Alright? Gotta get something in your system first. With that he gently placed the energy bar in Luffy's lap and left the room. Back at the bed, Luffy blinked slowly at the bar in his lap. He was propped up now, mostly thanks to the pillows behind him and Zoro's arm still steady along his back like a brace, ready to catch him if he falls. Luffy didn't mind the extra help, but he didn't like how his body had forgotten how to exist. How every muscle of his ached, even the lil ones. Still, he reached for the energy bar with both hands, happy to finally get at least something to eat. But his fingers promptly fumbled on it because the wrapper was just too slippery. His fingers, no longer trembling violently, were still sluggish and uncoordinated. He gripped the bar but promptly dropped it, before picking it open only to try and open the middle seam with utter failure. Zoro side-eyed him, unimpressed. You good, or you wanna wrestle that thing? Can do it, Luffy mumbled stubbornly, before his sleepy brain decided that the wrappers were optional anyways and he can eat that too. Meanwhile, Zoro blinked, watching in slow horror as Luffy opened his mouth, his hands lifting the bar. Don't you dare, Zoro warned, but Luffy didn't stop. Oi Luffy, Zoro yelled, as Luffy was about to take a bite into the energy bar, with wrapper and all. But luckily, Zoro snatched it from his hands just in time. Luffy blinked, feeling utterly betrayed. Hey, Zero. His lower lips wobbled as a whiny pout erupted on his face. Don't make that face to me. Zoro shielded his eyes from Luffy, who was looking like a puppy who got kicked. Luffy. You shouldn't eat the bar with the wrapper on, Chopper reprimanded in horror. He had been preparing some medicines and tugging the wires out of Luffy's system while keeping the IV attached. Yeah, we are not adding plastic poisoning to your recovering list, idiot, Nami spoke worriedly. Luffy slumped further into the pillows, clearly sulking, but it was winning. Zoro sighed, shoving the now unwrapped bar into his childish captain's hand. There, you win. Luffy blinked at the exposed bar, then brightened immediately. Thanks, Zero. You're hopeless, Zoro mumbled, glancing down at Luffy, who was happily munching on the bar now. Sanji kicked the infirmary door open gently, one foot nudging it wider as he balanced a steaming bowl of soup in one hand and a small tray stacked with warm side dishes in the other. His tie was loose, sleeves rolled up, and the marine chef uniform discarded from his being. The food's here. I need you to eat everything without leaving a bite, Sanji declared, strutting in with a soft smile. Luffy perked up immediately, eyes glittering, cheeks puffed as he was still working through the last bit of the energy bar. Food? Yay. Yeah, slow down, the food's all yours, Sanji said, setting the tray carefully on the bed, before handing out some food to the others as well. They ought to be hungry from the ordeal. By the way, Sanji started after giving everyone their food. Everyone on the way here. They're not asleep, he uttered, his tone shifting slightly as he straightened up and rolled his shoulders. Zoro's brows furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? I mean they're unconscious, Sanji clarified in a low tone, as if telling a secret. It's nearly 1 in the morning, yeah, but these guys weren't snoring or changing shifts. I mean, every single marine, officer, and even the nurses were flat on their face, lying on the floors or the desks. Not a single soul is conscious. What? How's that possible? Chopper squeaked. Luffy, munching on his food, blinked. For the first time since he had woken up, his tired gaze focused on the energy radiating off the base, sensing each and everything. The base, indeed, didn't have a single awake soul other than them. Not even Robin or Usopp were awake, lying asleep in the abyss of unconsciousness. And the cause of it all? It was their energy. Hidden yet clearly in view. Soft, powerful and familiar. Carrying the whispers of roots and brine, the scent of earth and tide interwoven like a forgotten lullaby. Surrounding the base, engulfing it yet just being here with its unmistakable charm. It was the gentle chaos of Vinny, her powers over the spirits, that had brought him back. It was his mother's gentle worry who forced her to come to him. Luffy's heart felt overwhelmed with gratitude and joy, at the chance of once again living his life without restarting it from the beginning without any prior memories. A smile graced his lips at the thought, lighting up the room, leading the moonlight to peek inside too, breaking the gloom of the infirmary. "Thanks, Vinny, Mama. This is the perfect time to bail," Nami uttered, her voice brisk and determined. "The guards are down, the base is knocked out, and we've still got our ship. We can get back the things they might have taken from us before leaving, if we move now." Chopper nodded in quick agreement. "And maybe even stash a little of their medicine supplies." Nami's eyes gleamed as another thought entered his mind. Treasures. The Marines got to hoard a lot in their vaults. So what if they get some? Or all? After all, they're the ones who might have taken their gold first. Luffy licked the corner of his mouth clean as he placed the bowl back on the tray and leaned back slightly against Zoro's support. "We can't leave just yet," he uttered as his lips curled into a grin, one that was deceptively lazy. Everyone paused, looking at Luffy as if he had grown a second head, which won't be a shocker anymore. "Excuse me," Nami said, blinking. "Did you not hear the part where we can finally escape?" Luffy grinned wider, as his sleepy sunlight red eyes started to look mischievous. "Gotta do something first." Sanji raised a brow. "What are you thinking, Luffy?" "Revenge," Luffy said, his voice airy and sweet, as he leaned back in confidence. "For thinking I do their bidding. For daring to send me a proposal for the warlord seat." Zoro smirked, absolutely loving the plan of messing up with the Marines. Now that's the Luffy I know. "So what's the plan?" He was truly happy to see Luffy being able to speak properly without speaking like a baby. Chopper and Sanji leaned in, eyes wide with curiosity, wanting to hear the plan, and already in it. Nami, on the other hand, paled. "Revenge? Luffy, revenge on the world government? Have you lost your mind?" "Hey," Luffy pouted, huffing cutely, before he giggled, childlike and soft, but it was the kind of softicanes. "But it's already started," he grinned. Nami blinked. "What do you mean?" before noticing along with the others, except Sanji, who had already noticed it and was still confused about it. The infirmary walls, once clean and polished, were stained with damp moss now. Vines were crawling across the corners basking in moonlight. Cracks in the ceiling let in the moonbeams that illuminated the thick roots pushing through the stone. The floors were damp, and a faint humidity hung in the air, like the inside of an abandoned, overgrown, flooded ruin. "This place," Zoro muttered, eyes narrowing. "It didn't look like this an hour ago." "It's like a ghost base now," Chopper whispered, shivering. Nami gaped. How? When?" "I noticed it on my way to the kitchen and I'm still confused," Sanji said with a shrug. "It's due to Mama and Vinny coming in," Luffy chirped with excitement, as he inhaled the last piece of food on his plate. "Huh, they revived me," Luffy sheepishly grinned, casually dropping the bomb while trying to get off the bed all on his own, only to dangerously fall towards the floor. He really would have hurt his face if not for Zoro and Sanji, who ditched their shocks to rescue their idiot captain. It was about 1:10 in the night. The winds, which had howled like wounded beasts just hours ago, were now whisper quiet, gentle, brushing past the cliffs in soft exhalations. The ocean, once a tempest snarling like a monster with its dangerous waves, was now lapping gently at the shore. Even the raging rains had completely disappeared into the winds and the clouds. It was as if the very world had now calmed down, as if the sky had taken a breath, as if the sea had let go of its anger that it had been holding onto too tightly. And from the very dark ocean below, a ship was slicing through the waves, its black sails glowing faintly under the moonlight. The Jolly Roger of the Spade Pirates was snapping in the wind, its sails ominous, proud and pissed. And at the bow stood Ace. Portgas d'Ace. Gold d'Ace. The captain, whose flames were licking off his shoulders. He didn't wait for the ship to dock. He didn't wait to be told to be careful. He didn't wait for the others to follow. No, Ace jumped the moment they got close enough, soaring through the night air, leaving behind a startled, "Ace. Wait," from Deuce and a chorus of yells from the rest of his crew. But Ace didn't hear them. Or rather, he didn't care. His only focus was locked onto one thing, or rather being Luffy. His hockey was screaming, unchained and unbound. It wasn't leaking, it was just free, shouting to anyone with the sense of sensing his position, flooding the base like sunlight, unhidden, unfiltered, untamed. He hadn't flared it this openly since they were kids, since they were taught to hide their presence. Ace landed hard on the cliffside, barely pausing to inhale before he took off again, running through the wild maze of the overgrown base, covered with vines and molds, damp and humid. It took him only a moment, only a second, to finally see him. Coming out from one of the half-crumbled wings of the base, Zoro was moving at a careful, steady pace, carrying a familiar mop of black hair streaked with white strands and red eyes. It was no doubt Luffy, perched there, his arms weakly hanging around Zoro's neck like a sleepy baby, with his face pale but smiling. Smiling that dumb, sleepy grin of his that somehow always managed to punch Ace in the heart and bring a smile on his face. But Ace's breath hitched and his eyes glossed. He didn't think anymore, he just sprinted. Luffyyy. Zoro looked up just in time for a blazing fireball to rocket towards him, followed by a horde of crowd, all of them having familiar faces. But Zoro wasn't given enough time, even when Sanji, Chopper, and Nami stood before him to defend Luffy. He was about to get his swords, when the blazing inferno receded to form the familiar figure of Ace, who practically teleported across the corner. This was all Zoro managed before Ace was there, snatching Luffy off his back like he was his baby and he was rightfully taking him back. Ace, whoa, Luffy yelped, blinking as he was spun around in the air and then hugged tightly against a warm, rapidly thumping chest. While his legs dangled uselessly, and his arms slowly rose to rest on Ace's shoulders. Ace, he said again, voice soft yet confused, you came. You idiot, Ace choked, pressing his forehead against Luffy's. His voice was cracked, his hands trembled around Luffy's back, and his eyes shed tears in sheer relief. I felt it. I saw it. Your Vivre card disappearing. You moron. He was babbling nonsense at this point, but Ace didn't care. I felt your hockey, you idiot. Why was it? Why are you flaring it like that? I thought you. His voice cut off with a broken exhale as he clutched Luffy closer, as if afraid he'd disappear. Luffy blinked, dazed from the whirlwind hug and the heat radiating off his brother. I'm okay, he said softly in a reassuring manner. I'm okay now. See, she. Ace pulled back only slightly to inspect him, his fingers ghosting over Luffy's cheeks, his collarbone, his temples. You're sickly pale. You're shaking. You look like a damn ghost. Your eyes are red? What the hell? That's a question I also wanted to ask, Usopp muttered from Zoro's behind. He had been woken up by Sanji and the others, who looked like a wreck. But the worst of them was Luffy, who looked as if he had died and came back. And why was Ace here now? As if what he is thinking has truly happened. It didn't, right? Red eyes. Luffy tilted his head, a small frown pulling at his lips. I always had them, at least earlier. But they're cool, right? He smiled, grinning a bit brighter now. Ace didn't say a word, he just hugged him again, while the rest of the Spade Pirates finally caught up, skidding into Luffy's view, panting, wide-eyed, and collectively collapsing with a chorus of, Luffy. Captain. Oh, thank God he's okay. Meanwhile, Ace, still cradling Luffy like a fragile baby, turned to the Straw Hats. Who did this? Ace asked, his voice dropping into something much darker. His grip on Luffy didn't tighten but his flames did curl up around his shoulders, not hurting him though. Who did this? Who let him die? Which motherfucker is responsible for this? Ace. Luffy uttered quickly, not giving his crew a chance to answer or Usopp to express his shock. But it seemed like Robin knew it, and noticing her red-rimmed puffy eyes, she had cried too. It's okay. Luffy was squirming a little by now, trying to lean back towards Zoro or at least reach out for his crew. I'm fine now, really, I just, took a short deep nap. Nah, Ace said firmly, still holding him in place. You died, didn't you? Don't lie to me, Luffy. Luffy gave the guiltiest little giggle. She. Kinda. But only for a short while, she. Luffy died. When? What the hell happened? Usopp shrieked, worried, and cursed himself for jinxing Luffy. But now everything was making sense. The puffy eyes of everyone, even of Robin, who was woken up by the group who knew it, after he was. Zoro just sighed behind them, arms crossed. He's stubborn as ever, don't waste your breath. But Ace wasn't letting go yet. His arms remained gentle but unmoving, not letting go of Luffy. Because he almost lost him, his baby brother again. And this time he wasn't letting him go until he knew everything. Tell me, Ace growled low, arms still wrapped tightly around Luffy's frail frame. Who the hell did this to you? I swear I'll give that fucker the worst possible death. Burn him till the bastard's nothing but ash. Luffy flinched, not at the swearing he was used to it but at the tension, at the fury in Ace's voice. He was sweating profusely by now, wriggling in his big brother's arms like a caught toddler, shaking his head frantically, mumbling weak, croaky little protests. And no, Ace, don't. But that was when Ace noticed ticking Luffy's desperate struggle in his grip and everyone, Nami, Zoro, Sanji, Chopper, Robin pointing towards Luffy. Not naming an enemy's name. Not pointing towards a marine or someone else, but at Luffy. Even Usopp, who looked like he'd just been hit with the truth not even 5 seconds ago, was pointing too, towards Luffy, with tears pricking his eyes, fists clenching in silent agony and eyes showing clear helplessness. Perhaps someone had finally enlightened him about the situation. Sanji looked like he was trying not to kick a wall down. Nami's shoulders were trembling. Robin was standing silent, arms folded tightly, like she was holding herself together. Zoro was looking down, ashamed and wanting to do something. Ace's heart skipped, his lips parted, dry suddenly. "No," he muttered, his eyes darting down to the squirming mess in his arms. "No, you didn't. Tell me you didn't use that." "He did." Zoro's voice cut in, sharp and cold like a blade, but there was no anger directed towards anyone but himself. "He fucking used that form," he gritted out, as anger, guilt and helplessness waved off his posture. "And stayed in it, for goddamn 4 days." Ace's mind reeled. 4 days. 4 days of Luffy being Nika. 4 fucking days. And now that Ace knew, really knew, there was no unseeing it. The red eyes. The white streaks in his black hair. The slight golden hue faintly clinging to his skin. The overwhelming haki that still pulsated through the base like a war drum in slumber. He used it. Before his crew. He burned it. Burned his mortal body in it. He died. Almost didn't come back. And now, his crew knew. Somehow, they knew. And they were just as wrecked, just as broken over it, as Ace felt in that very moment. Luffy was whimpering, still squirming but with desperation, with panic. Though still too tired from being revived. Too weak to run. Too stubborn not to squirm. His fingers were clinging onto Ace's shirt like a scared kitten who just wanted to get away. Ace's heart dropped. He had wanted to beat the crap out of Luffy for transforming into Nika, for endangering his body, his life, this way, when he knew that his mortal body wasn't capable of handling it yet. But instead, his lips wobbled. His rage collapsed under the weight of helplessness. "Fuck, Luffy," he whispered, his voice breaking into a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His fingers curled in Luffy's shirt. His forehead pressed against his little, baby brother's. "I'm so fucking sorry I wasn't there," he cried, for not being there to help Luffy fight whatever enemy it was that took Luffy to transform into Nika. "I should have been there. I should have," his voice cracked. "I'm the worst big brother in the goddamn world." Luffy stopped squirming and his body went still in Ace's arms as he finally saw Ace's face, his eyes leaking tears. His emotions radiating, pouring into him like crashing waves. Unfiltered, raw, overwhelming. He had been able to feel everything, every little thing's emotions for a while, but these emotions radiating off of everyone was making him nauseous. Chopper's frantic worry and sadness of being unable to do anything despite being a doctor. Nami's silent, bone-deep helplessness and cursing herself for not being stronger. Zoro's boiling rage, directed at himself, for not being a good first mate. Sanji's guilt, laced with protectiveness, for not taking care of him. Robin's quiet grief, and hatred for herself, for not even being there for him. And Usopp's fear, for his life, for not being there, for being weak and insufficient. But none of them compared to Ace. Not even his own crew, who were looking at him with sadness, guilt and helplessness in their eyes. No, Ace's emotions were burning. Not with fire, but with guilt, sorrow, love, protectiveness, and every damn negative and positive thing. It was overwhelming. It was like being submerged under the sea without his mother and in the clouds without a protector. Luffy's breath hitched. His eyes glistened, glowing. He could feel Ace's heartbeat thumping erratically in his chest, fast and scared. Scared that Luffy would reject Ace and hate him. "S okay." Luffy mumbled, his voice soft and trembling and hoarse, as his little fingers, still shaky, reached up and clumsily wiped the tears off Ace's cheek. "S not your fault." Ace blinked, stunned at the forgiveness. Luffy's lip trembled for a second but then he took a deep breath and said, a little louder, "Wasn't anyone's fault. My body just did it. Turned into me, gain. 'Cause we were so close to the sun, you know?" His words were slow, slurred, almost childish, like his brain was still trying to remember how to speak after being asleep for so long. But they were clear enough this time. Felt amazing, though. He murmured dreamily, a small smile coming over his face. Like I could do anything. As if I had absolute freedom. Like I didn't have to hold back. I could just be me. All of me. Without holding anything in. Without controlling myself. There was a brief silence, before Luffy, still leaning against Ace, cracked his eyes open again and looked up. His smile was wide, bright and warm like the sun. "No regrets," he whispered with a grin. "I'm okay now, even if I don't have a lot of energy right now." Ace stared at Luffy. Everyone stared at him. The soft glow in his face. That stupid, radiant smile. He looked so small, so tired, yet still, so Luffy. "You're a dumbass," Ace muttered, smiling through his tears as he let out a choked breath, half a laugh, half a sob and dropped a kiss to Luffy's pale, shaky hands, making the little dumbass giggle as if everything was okay again. Which indeed was. And that was when a gust of wind ripped through the corridor in a hurry, revealing Sabo and Dragon, the one behind the frenzy and the wind's land right behind them. Luffy, what happened?" Ace flinched at the blonde twins' war cries just as Sabo barreled forward like a blonde missile, without even waiting for a second. He just launched himself right at Ace and Luffy like he was 10 years old, in that fire, afraid and panicked and worried and crying. He tried to pry Luffy out of Ace's hold, but when Ace didn't budge, clearly not planning to hand Luffy over anytime soon, Sabo gave up. He simply squeezed himself in, making it a three-person brother sandwich, as he checked Luffy, making sure that he truly was there. Luffy let out a confused little, "Eh?" as Sabo wrapped his arms around both him and Ace, burying his face into Luffy's shoulder and crying, while muttering, "You idiot. You're alive, you're alive. I was so scared. Why did you leave?" "Why?" Sabo was crying, not even caring about his reputation being destroyed. "Who did it? Who the hell dared to touch you? Tell me, I am gonna kill that bastard." "Bo," Luffy whined, tired by now by explaining that he truly was fine. "I'm okay, I'm fine." Meanwhile, Dragon stood still at the edge, his expression unreadable and jaw clenched as his sharp eyes scanned Luffy, at least what was available in view head to toe. The signs were clear. The sickly pale skin. The glowing red eyes, with slight rings flickering in them every so often. The faint white streaks blending into Luffy's black hair like sunlight, though, can be possibly hidden by his straw hat. But his haki Nika's haki still clinging to the air, mixed with some more divine presence leaking off of Luffy. Dragon knew what had happened. His son had transformed, gone beyond his limits, once again. And judging by the reactions, the worry in the faces of the Straw Hats, and the way not a single one looked confused but deeply helpless and in guilt, it was obvious. They all knew. Dragon's hand twitched slightly. By all logic, by every cold, revolutionary instinct he had drilled into himself, this should have been a threat. A secret no one should have known. A secret whose price is instant death. But, he could see them. Zoro and Sanji hovered close, tense like watchdogs, ready to defend their captain. Nami, Chopper and Usopp sniffling and wiping their tears, but never once been looked ready to attack anyone who posed as a threat at a second's notice. They all loved Luffy. They all embraced Luffy being Nika, the sun god. And that was all Dragon needed. So, he exhaled slowly, and instead of drawing a blade or some another gust, he walked forward and with a gentleness, which should be unknown to him, he ruffled Luffy's wild hair. "Papa," Luffy slurred, instantly reaching up as joy lit in his tired eyes. Dragon cleared his throat, taking his son in his arms, though clearly flustered at the old calling. "Don't say it like that in front of others," he muttered, voice slightly gruff, though hopeful to hear the word once again and always. "You're not 7. Ace and Sabo snorted, though slightly offended at their dad for taking Luffy away from their arms. Zoro and Sanji definitely smirked. Even Nami, Usopp, Robin and the others let out a low chuckle, clearly able to see the tsundere personality of the man. By now, the little corridor wasn't just filled with 3 brothers and a tsundere dad. It was filled with the Straw Hat Pirates, the Spade Pirates, and the entire revolution. Bonnie came crashing through the entrance with the rest of the revolutionary army, her sobs loud enough to be heard a corridor away. "Luffyyy knee," she was wailing, sprinting over, tears flying everywhere as she practically climbed over Dragon's tall structure, tackling Luffy in a hug. "You idiot, I thought you were gone." Behind her was Kuma, lumbering forward slowly with silent sobs leaving his mouth and shoulders trembling. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside Dragon, his massive hands trembling, as he gently placed his palm over Luffy's head. A single tear slid down his cheek and then another. The kind of tears that belonged to a man who had lost too much already and didn't have the heart to lose any anymore. Luffy blinked at them all, confused and overwhelmed, but smiling. Even the Spades who had been holding back till now, joined in, their usual swagger tempered by the relief of seeing their youngest alive. Patting his hair, taking him in his arms, making jokes, crying when they thought no one was looking, in sheer relief. When the chaos finally settled, when Luffy had been kissed, hugged, crushed and nearly suffocated under piles of love, questions began to be thrown at Luffy, and threats to the one who did it. "Fine," Luffy whined, getting to Zoro somehow, who was ready to defend him from anyone, even his brothers at Luffy's command. "But we need to know what happened," Sabo insisted, his hand already twitching to strangle the one who did all this. "Zoro, explain them, pretty please," Luffy whined, hiding behind his swordsman, not wanting to be handed from one person to another right now. He was tired and he still had to bobby-trap the whole base and mess it up. "Why me?" Zoro frowned dramatically, though he was soon to launch onto the explanation, seeing that everyone present there knew that Luffy's the sun god, Nika, at least. When everything was said and the listeners were given ample time to process the information, Kuma stepped forward. "Dragon," he said. "What about the revolution's timeline? You had moved it up. You said the world had to move now." He glanced at Luffy, at his god, but the reason for that urgency was that Luffy was gone. Everyone turned to Dragon, who opened his eyes, his gaze unreadable. But when he looked at his son, peeking behind his swordsman's shoulder, red eyes sleepy but burning with life, his shoulders relaxed. Looks like the world still has its light, Dragon answered. The new timeline stays. But the target isn't the world government yet, it's the PPP. There was silence. Pure silence as everyone was taking in the words. But this was also when the faint alarm, that hadn't been stopped yet, kept blaring off. Shouting for anyone to hear about the warning. BORI and PIE, BORI and PIE. Dragon's eyes widened as he instantly recognized the alarm. The new code that was associated with the 3 Cs. But why was it ringing here of all places? BORI, he muttered. Blue, orange, red, infiltration. That's a high-level breach code. Used only for signs of the 3 Cs. His gaze flicked to Luffy, knowing that his son had to do something with this. Why is that blaring here? Luffy blinked up at him innocently, cocking his head like an innocent puppy who had been caught with something he shouldn't have done. Dunno, Luffy chirped, voice high and lively, way too casual for a man that was supposed to have died less than an hour ago. Then, without missing a beat, he leaned more into Zoro's arms and dramatically kicked his legs in the air, grinning. Anyway, I need to wreck this whole place before we leave. That got a raised eyebrow from some, while deadpans from the others. I did get a letter from the Marines, Luffy pouted, remembering the paper he had torn to pieces. Asking me to join the warlords. TCH, as if I'd ever do their bidding. Gotta leave my mark, right, to pay them back, you know, like the old days. His tone dipped just slightly at the end, nostalgic and dangerous. Ace, Sabo, Dragon, Bonnie, Kuma, the Spade Pirates, most of the revs present there, Robin, Zoro and Sanji, they all caught it. The glint in his eyes. The mischievous look, that maniacal grin, which was always brought together with Syra. But none of them said a thing. Instead, everyone else, some of the revs, the Straw Hats who didn't know, just tilted their heads. Why do you sound like you're about to pretend to be the actual 3 Cs? Usopp asked with a shiver. Sabo slid in fast, pulling Luffy out of Zoro's grip with a wink, protectively wrapping an arm around his small shoulders before anyone else could get nosy. What's the plan, Lou? You got anything in mind? Luffy's grin turned wicked at that. Oh yeah. I'm gonna bobby trap this entire base, he said cheerfully, his legs happily kicking in the air as much as they could without getting tired while in Sabo's arms. From the command rooms to the docks to the ceiling toilets, everything. That was all it took for more ideas to come forward and chaos to be officially declared as the Straw Hat Pirates. The Spade Pirates and the revolutionaries came together, evilly planning methods to make the lives of Marines sufferable. Graffiti. Usopp shouted, his arm shooting into the air like he was answering a question. We need a big art, something that'll make the Marines regret ever seeing it. Zoro leaned against the wall and cracked his knuckles. If you're gonna be running around, Luffy, which he definitely can't right now, I'm going with you, dumbass. Someone's gotta make sure you don't collapse mid-prank. And hey, bobby trapping sounds fun. Nami grinned, already calculating damage costs and profits. Let's release all the Marine ships into the open sea. No crews. Just the ships drifting away slowly. And take all the gold, jewels, and stolen treasure from their vaults. Sanji lit a cigarette, blew out smoke, and glared at Ace, Sabo, and Luffy in turn. But we're not messing with the food, got it? Exactly, Chopper nodded furiously. And leave the medical supplies alone. Some people are still injured, and we need those. Ace raised his hands, grinning. I was planning on eating some and maybe putting mini-bombs in every boot locker, he smirked. Sabo chimed in, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Only if I get to rig the showers to explode glitter. Robin smiled sweetly. I'll rearrange all their doents into smudges of ink and maybe line the handles with spikes, for ambiance. Even Bonnie sniffled, wiping her tears. I'm painting over every single portrait with Luffy Knee's face. How about powdering the place with glitter bombs? Painting the Marines' faces. Let's use permanent markers for that. Dyeing their clothes pink sounds good too. This way, almost everyone gave their ideas of messing the place up, while Dragon just stared at all of them with a warm smile on his face. Happy to finally see the chaos of his sons unleashed once again in aid of the 3 Cs. It was a beautiful morning. The sun was peeking gently over the cliffs, painting the sea in soft golds and pinks. The waves were even lapping calmly, the birds chirping in that annoyingly peaceful way they always did after a disaster, and the scent of damp and faint burnt greens drifted through the air. Commander Jonathan opened his eyes, groaning, his entire body aching. Why am I on the bathroom floor? He questioned himself, blinking up at the ceiling, which had vines growing across it like an abandoned greenhouse. He could even feel something stuck to his eyebrows, which turned out to be glitter. He literally had no memories of having ended up like that on the floor. Nothing after he'd slammed that emergency button the night before, shouting the alarm of the presence of the 3 Cs in his base, which alone should have triggered a lockdown. But here he was, lying on a cold floor with almost no memories of ending up here. He grumbled, pushing himself up with old man joints cracking in protest. His sharp, calculating mind kicked in even as his back did not. With stiff legs and a confused frown, he trudged out of the bathroom, only to stop. What the actual hell? The entire corridor was messed up, with damp floors, green vines crawling across walls, which were somehow painted to resemble the dramatic faces of his officers, who were sprawled over with drawings on their faces, flower crowns, or even tiny mustaches drawn on with permanent marker. One of them was even tied upside down from the ceiling with seaweed, peacefully snoring like a baby. Jonathan took a careful step, only to walk on a water balloon mine, barely dodging the atrocious thing dangling in a net of confetti and bells. But the next second, his boots squelched. Yup. The 3 C's were definitely here, he muttered with a tone of acceptance as if it was a daily ritual for the man. He walked furthermore through the disaster, all the while triggering traps which even in the plain sight were seeming to be unavoidable. One of them even launched a jack-in-the-box that screamed, "Marines, beware, the 3 C's strike again." Jonathan's left eye twitched in irritation. He wanted to crush everything in his sight, kick his officers awake, but he needed to get to his office. His head was already pounding, his joints were groaning, and his whole body was trembling with suppressed rage. But the moment he made it to his office, barely escaping some of the traps and getting attacked by almost all, especially those bobby traps which were every damn where, he regretted it. Jonathan freaking regretted opening the door of his office, because poof, a bucket filled with glitter, sticky, pink and clingy, covered his entire face, coat, and body. Great. Just great. Jonathan groaned, wiping down some of the glitters, only to find it hard to do with his sticky glittery hands. He sighed, as he stumbled to his window next, brushing the glitter off with a napkin from his eyes at least, but he paused once again at the view which greeted him. Outside, the seas were sparkling in serenity, nothing like the night before. And in those seas, 3 ships were sailing away. One of them carrying the Jolly Roger of the Straw Hat Pirates, and the other 2 seemed to be worn apart from the previous night's storm, making it unrecognizable. Perhaps, the Straw Hat Luffy, the enigma whom he wasn't even able to see, was still being hunted down by the 3 C's, chased and now captured by them. Another shocking part was the marine ships, which were just floating, unmanned, drifting, with no care of the world. Jonathan slumped against the window frame. Glitter still clung to his hands and face, the latter probably being covered with drawings. But he was too tired to care. "I hate pirates," he groaned, before correcting himself with a long, exhausted sigh. "I shouldn't have woken up today. It had been 5 hours. 5 hellish, soul-sucking hours since Commander Jonathan had woken up with glitter glued to his eyebrows and shame stitched into the very fabric of his uniform. His mind still hasn't recovered, but neither has his base. Because apparently, every corner of his once pristine G8 base was now covered with chaotic vines, damp walls, sparkly booby traps, graffiti, and other items that he dared not cross again. Jonathan rubbed his temples as he wandered through the ravaged hallways, half limping and half dragging one glitter-drenched boot behind him. The corridors looked like a jungle with moss and vines crawling up the walls like nature reclaiming a ruin. Even water dripped from the ceiling, soaking into old doughnuts and forming puddles that smelled slightly of citrus. He truly wanted to scream, or retire, or just crawl into his bed and pretend the entire ordeal never happened. The worst part was that his bed was ruined, but that was not the only thing. His uniform was still soaked in that disgusting blend of glue, water, and whatever the hell the 3 C's had mixed into that glitter bomb. And it was pink, sticky, clingy, radioactive Barbie-core pink. Not that he had anything against pink, it was just humiliating that the clothes are now ruined. He can't even change out of the fucking abomination because all his other clothes were far more cursed. They were ruined with mud, moss, and what looked like mold growing out of his captain's cape. His undershirt even had a vine growing through the sleeve. And his other boots had been filled to the brim with ink. Truly, he didn't even have the energy to feel mad anymore, he was just done. He leaned against a vine-wrapped wall with a sigh, not even caring that it was wet. After all, what was the point even? Only 5 hours, and in that time, all he'd seen was disaster recovery failing at every turn. His subordinates were awake now, bustling about like girls in pink, some frantically scrubbing glitter off the walls, others tiptoeing around booby traps or pressure plates, trying not to activate whatever fresh hell the 3 C's had left behind. But honestly, it was all pointless, and Jonathan knew it very well. The whole base had been gutted from the inside out, leaving nothing much to salvage. The officers were drenched, covered in glitter and pink. The archives were destroyed, some even had moss growing on them. The shipyard was destroyed, with the ships being out of control. Even the scant library had been turned into some twisted maze of floating books, levitating via strings and residual water. But there was something that still baffled him in all this chaos. The kitchen and infirmary were untouched. Well, not untouched. The supplies were neatly rearranged. And while several food crates and medical kits were missing, everything else had been left in place. Even organized with tiny notes of recipes and instructions written on them. It was like whoever raided the place had manners. That's what was throwing Jonathan in a loop. The three C's were demons, notorious to their name, sure. But they didn't act like this. Not usually. This level of precision, this restraint, it just didn't fit the chaos they always left behind. They usually pillaged every room, set traps in every corner, and destroyed the expensive PPP products, and even rewired most of the electronics to explode. So, why were the essentials, which were usually ransacked or messed with, spared? Commander Jonathan truly didn't have an answer to this. All he had were questions and increasingly itchy glitter rash. But why G8? His base wasn't special. Not publicly, not privately. They did not have any top-secret scrolls. No treasure. No weapons buried beneath the floorboards. Just an average outpost for average Marines in a cliff-locked stretch of sea. He stared blankly at the ceiling, which now had a giant smiley face painted in neon green seaweed and signed, with love, 3 C's. With a heart or two in shell fragments. Damn you, 3 C's. He muttered. And as if summoned by the name alone, the memory of the morning resurfaced, clear as the sun now shining mockingly through the cracked office window, seemingly teasing him. As soon as he'd seen the 3 ships, the Straw Hat's ship guided by 2 other vessels, slipping silently from his harbor, he'd known. He had known that it was the 3 C's. So, he hadn't even waited, he grabbed the Den Den Mushi and called Marine HQ. The 3 C's were here. He'd hissed through gritted teeth, trying to wipe glitter off the snail's face. G8 has been compromised. Demolished. He paused for a moment, before sighing. They left us, ruined. Several questions were asked, before came several phrases of curses and then, reinforcements are on their way, before they disconnected. Jonathan had laughed out loud at that. Reinforcements? As if there was anything left to reinforce. The 3 C's weren't a wave to hold back, they were a storm that had passed through and now Jonathan had to stand amid the wreckage of what was once his pride, soaked in pink goo and existential dread, wondering if he should retire and take up gardening instead. Sengoku had woken up that morning with hope, thinking that his day would be absolutely great. After all, he had finished his reports the night before, with every file signed, every stamp placed, every last incident log sorted and cross-checked. Even his desk, for once, was spotless. He had just wanted to have a free day today, wanting to stand on his balcony, with his beloved goat beside him and a warm cup of tea in hand. And later go on a stroll, away from all the chaos and work. That's why today was supposed to be his day off, with peace and serenity. But then, he should have known better than to jinx himself. It was 6 a.m, sharp. He hadn't even woken up by that time when his personal Den Den Mushi started screaming with urgency. Commander Jonathan, G8 base. Emergency report. The 3 C's were here. Sengoku's first reaction was blank, with his mind trying to process what the hell was the commander saying this early in the morning. But when his mind was capable, he fell into a blinding silence, not because of shock, but because he knew somewhere deep inside him that it was coming. The 3 C's have been far too quiet after Arabasta, where they had infamously crashed into civil war, burned through both sides, and somehow came out as heroes of all things. And gods, didn't that sting? The way even the world government had to begrudgingly accept that the 3 C's saved a country from being lost to civil war. The fact that the civilians were singing praises of them. The fucking chance that maybe the king of that country might ally with them. But now they were fucking back to their usual business of destroying marine bases. This was the chaos which makes them notorious, and make the Gorosei breathe down his fucking damn neck to capture those freaking brats. He sat down on his desk, the one he thought he wouldn't have to for today, with a grunt, already massaging his temples before Jonathan even finished his report. G8 has been compromised. Demolished, the commander croaked, his anger visible in his tone. They left us ruined. Elaborate, Sengoku had asked with gritted teeth, already wanting to just disconnect the call. Vines, water damage, sabotage traps, graffiti, bobby traps, some sort of glitter-based explosives. Sengoku sighed, knowing it was definitely them by now. Any casualties? He asked with a sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose and reached for a cup of tea he hadn't made yet. None. Not a scratch except being humiliated. But the base is non-operational, and the commander seemed to hesitate and Sengoku could already feel the headache pulsing behind his eyes. Commander, we believe the Straw Hat pirates were involved. Possibly taken hostage. All I could see was 2 unmarked black ships guiding them out of the port. And that was when his good morning had officially exploded and blasted into bits. Even when he reassured the commander that he would be sending reinforcements, and even when he the full report, he couldn't feel relaxed anymore. Not when the Gorosei were on the line within an hour, enraged and pressurizing. We can't let them go this time. Send 2 admirals after them this instant, they had ordered, leaving Sengoku baffled. After all, dispatching the admirals after them was an extreme response, but by this time, it truly was required. The 3 C's, one of the elders continued coldly, and possibly the child of Dragon, we need them all alive. Sengoku could feel a chill settle in his bones at the last word. There was something in the way the elder said that made it seem like there was something that he is not privy to. But what could make the elders want Straw Hat Luffy alive? Was it because the guy refused to be a warlord? Or that he is the brother of the possible child of Gold D. Roger? Or that he has the backing of a supernova and damned revolutionaries? Whatever it was, Garp ought to be worried now, Senny. Speak of the devil, and shall he come? Sengoku's left eye twitched as Garp entered his office, breaking a wall once again. Garp, for the last time, will you ever come through the actual door? Sengoku questioned, the pounding in his head increasing with every passing second. But Garp, he didn't care. He just strolled in, wearing that usual grin of his, and with maddening casualness, sprawled atop a spare chair, casually munching on a packet of rice crackers, leaving the crumbs all over his paperwork. Sengoku had barely opened his mouth once again before Garp burst into laughter after taking a glance from the paperworks. Hey, that's what got you all twisted up, Garp snorted. You're panicking over the 3 C's again? I thought you were used to that by now. They destroyed a marine base, Sengoku's eye twitched. Isn't that what they always do? Garp laughed. Garp, it's covered in vines and is soaked through. Sengoku was literally screaming now. Could be worse, Garp merrily shrugged, hiding his anger behind his goofy smile. Could be covered in corpses. Which was something that could have definitely happened if Luffy was found dead in the base. He knew something had gone horribly wrong last night, but he hasn't been called up yet, meaning that his grandson should be fine. Sengoku glared at Garp so hard that even the Den Den Mushi on the table flinched, but Garp wasn't finished laughing. Garp, your grandson has been taken by those 3 C's. He was seen leaving between 2 black ships. Prisoner or not, that's not a good look, Sengoku stated, hoping that this would at least make Garp understand the severity of the situation. But the unexpected happened. Garp howled in laughter, laughing so hard that he even fell off the chair, as if he had been told the funniest joke ever. It almost seemed that the old slacker of the Marines wasn't even worried, almost as if Luffy, that troublesome brat, wasn't even his grandson in the first place. Sengoku wanted to cry. He wanted to give up now. God, Gorosei, please let me retire soon. This is a serious situation, Garp, Sengoku groaned. The Gorosei ordered to dispatch 2 admirals to find clues about the attack and track the 3 C's down. Why send 2 admirals after those brats? That's a bit too much, isn't it? Garp asked, finally a tad bit serious, and sounding a bit worried. Sengoku sighed again. Deep, from the chest, the kind that came with decades of being the fleet admiral in the era of pirates and chaos. Because the 3 C's are slippery bastards, and if they've captured the Straw Hats, or if they're helping them, it's going to cause waves. Big ones. That's why the world government wants this contained before the press gets wind of it. But late for that, Garp snorted, standing up. The damn birds of Morgan must have probably delivered the news before the backup even got there. That's true, but this time we will make a comeback by capturing the 3 C's and Straw Hat Luffy, Sengoku stated with a serious face. Akainu and Kuzan have already set off. Akainu, why the hell is that mud on this mission? Garp gritted his teeth, his fists clenching at the thought of either of his grandsons going against that bastard. No change, Garp. Garp didn't wait for Sengoku to finish. He just stormed out of the office, probably worried about his grandson.
Sengoku sighed. Can't wait for retirement. The sea stretched endlessly, a shimmering canvas of blue and white, with sunlight dancing across every wave. And on it, 3 ships, the Going Merry, the Peace of Spadil, and the Wind Grandma, glided across in harmony. With their sails full, their flags snapping proudly in the warm breeze, each about to depart in different directions, and yet nobody wanted to leave.
The revolutionaries were supposed to go. After all, the meeting with their commanders had been made official. The war against the world government and PPP would begin soon. The curtain was about to be drawn open, and the Wind Grandma had to return to the hidden base of Baltigo to prepare for the storm that would shake the entire world. The Spades wanted to stick for a while longer, vibing with their little one, but the truth was they had to leave too. To explore the deeper, wilder parts of paradise before braving the new world once again. But well, Ace hadn't moved from his spot all day, and he wasn't planning to, either. At least not until someone sensible kicked some sense into him. And the Straw Hats were technically on the clock, with the log pose already pointing towards a new island, and if they didn't get moving soon, they'd have to wait for a while before the log finally pointed to some other island. But Luffy, who's the captain of the ship, who usually gives the final word on leaving, also hadn't even ordered anything such yet. Instead, on the Mary's main deck, a circle had been formed with blankets that had been thrown down, with snacks being passed around, and in the center was Luffy, comfortably perched on Ace's lap, with his legs draped over his brother's with no intention of moving. His complexion was a tad bit better by now, but neither had his eyes yet reverted back to the chocolatey brown everyone was accustomed to, nor had his hair color changed back to completely black. Though, the latter was easily hidden when the straw hat rested on his head. And then the sky just went red, like blood red, the same one when Halid was pissed. Luffy was grinning widely, his cheeks were flushed with energy, and mouth moving a mile a minute as he waved his arms around to illustrate some grand moments. The winds were screaming, and the clouds wanted their revenge. And I was all free. Luffy leaned back, his hands flailing excitedly with each passing moment. To beat up Enel, who was claiming to be the god of the sky. But nah, that's my brother, not him. So, I knocked him out with a single punch. Sabo let out a low whistle, humoring his baby brother. That's my baby brother. Luffy mimed the punch with dramatic flair. Wait, back up, Bonnie interrupted, her eyes wide in excitement as she leaned towards Luffy, nearly falling, only to be steadied by Sabo, on whose lap she was resting. You said the wind screamed? As in, you heard them? Luffy blinked at her like it was obvious. Yeah, they're kinda loud, always chattering away. Usopp, who just walked up holding a tray of sandwiches, paused mid-step. His usual grin flattering and his gaze landing on Luffy, leading the tray to tilt slightly. Because there it was again. The guilt. The helplessness. The fact that he didn't even know that his friend, his captain, was going through a lot, and he was busy hiding. Though, Usopp could see that Luffy looked fine on the surface, talkative, loud, energetic as ever, but Usopp could clearly hear him stumbling on his words, nearly falling over if not for Ace to always steady him. The pale flush which was only increasing with every adversity, the slight tremble in his fingers when he waved too hard, and his smile, bright as ever, sunny as the day, but never quite reaching his eyes. He could clearly see the tiredness looming. OT recovered yet? Not really, and he could do nothing. While away from the laughter and noise below, where the chaos of Luffy's storytelling mixed with Usopp's dramatic imagination had enchanted everyone listening. Robin stood looking out towards the sea, her expression serene and calm, but her eyes were alert, and her mind spiraling on the dump of information she had received. After all, who could have thought that her captain, a god, was also the son of the most wanted man? And now said man, along with the towering figure of Bartholomew Kuma, was approaching her. Robin turned and smiled gently. I was wondering when you'd approach. Dragon gave the faintest twitch of a grin. You're as sharp as they say, Nico Robin. I try, she replied coolly, leaning against the railing. There was a beat of silence before Dragon leaned against the railing beside her with his arms folded and looking towards his son. You've made your choice, he said, not questioning, not even challenging, just a statement. Robin looked towards her captain. I have. Dragon exchanged a glance with Kuma, then back at her. Kuma had already told you, but I would still like to offer you a place with us. You can study about the poneglyphs freely, if you ever ask for it, Kuma spoke, his voice soft and with a smile on his face. Thank you. Robin's hands folded at her front, turning to face them fully, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening into something rare. But I am content where I am. For now, she answered. With the Straw Hat Pirates, with Luffy. I understand, Dragon answered, already knowing the answer. Besides, Robin murmured to herself, her voice low but audible to them. Why would I leave the man who's shaking the world just by being himself? You sound like a revolutionary, Kuma spoke with a smile, his lips curving knowingly. No, I am just a historian following the most dangerous story of all. Nami was standing with her hand on the rudder, steadying the ship, even if there was no need for it for now. But she needed it. She needed it. The breeze tousling her orange hair, the sea air prickling at her skin and the clear view of the others on the deck. Especially Luffy. Laughing, goofing off, eating, alive. As if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't died. But it wasn't something that was out of the ordinary by now, was it? Because after every fight Luffy would fall, his powers being too much for him. But all those times he would get up. He would get back on his legs and smile that stupid smile of his. Except this time, when his heart had stopped beating and his body had gotten cold. Nami's jaw clenched. Her knuckles turned white against the rudder. Luffy was glowing again. Not literally, but he was smiling so wide it could tear his face. His laughter was ringing out, loud and stupid, like it always did. She wished she could laugh with him, but the image of him, pale, coughing up blood, kept coming back. The way he had gone still and she had felt her world stopping. Had felt that one more person she cared about dying right before her eyes. That was trauma. She was getting tired of it. Tired of seeing Luffy put himself into danger, even if it was technically only the beginning of their journey. She couldn't feel herself getting accustomed to it. Not to the sight of Luffy dying, not the possibilities of a future where he never came back. And then there was Vinny, the name Luffy whispered fondly, thanking her for returning him. She still didn't know who or what that was. Or what it even meant. Or if it was something they needed to worry about now or in the far future. Or if that Vinny was on their side or could turn against Luffy. And that made her itch all over. While in the medbay, it was quiet. Too quiet. With Chopper quietly sitting on a stool beside his workbench, his hooves curled around a vial of blood and his eyes oogling it. It was Luffy's blood, the one he had taken just before everything had fallen apart. Before Luffy had collapsed. Before he took his last breath. Before his heartbeat stopped. Chopper hated how his hooves had trembled when Luffy fell. Hated how all his medicine had done nothing. Hated how he just stood there, shaking, with tears blurring his vision, too slow to do anything else, except scream. He was a doctor. Yet now it sounded like a joke and he felt like a fraud in a hat. Turning the vial over in his hooves again, he could feel its weight becoming heavier and heavier, not in weight but in meaning. Because this wasn't just blood, it was a challenge, and a failure. His failure. That Luffy had died and he had been useless. He had been helpless. Zoro, Sanji, Nami and Luffy were looking at him and yet he couldn't do a thing. He couldn't. "No, I can't cry," Chopper hiccuped, wiping his tears. "I have to be better," the little reindeer sniffled, reaching for a notebook, scribbling a line to take notes, observations, and writing down new theories. He would find out what had happened, what almost took him from them, and then he'd make sure it never happened again. Not to Luffy, not to anyone. He'd create cures for every illness, every curse, every unseen sickness the world could throw at them. He'd become the greatest doctor in the world, and not just to say it but to prove it, to earn it. The kitchen of the Going Merry was filled with the savory aroma of garlic, sautéed onions, and freshly grilled fish. Sanji, with his sleeves rolled up, and brow lightly dusted with sweat, was moving gracefully between the counters. With the cigarette dangling from his lips and a pan sizzling on the stove, he was deep in his element, cooking for not just for his crew, but their guests as well. It was keeping him focused, anchored, and away from everything else. It was giving his mind time to process at least something. But this focus, this concentration, was broken with a hesitant shuffle entering his territory. Sanji didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Not after hearing the heavy, uneven giant and the awkward hovering. "Oi, Marimo," Sanji grunted around the cigarette, not even sparing the moss head a glance. "If you're gonna just stand there staring, grab a knife and help." There was a beat of silence behind him, before Zoro let out a reluctant grunt, "TCH, whatever," and moved up to the cutting board with a blade in hand, definitely not one of his swords, and started slicing vegetables. It was silent for a while, except for the rough, fast, no finesse, uneven chopping of Zoro, but Sanji let it go for once. For a moment, there was only the crackle of the stove, the clatter of knife against vegetables, and the occasional bubbling of broth. Up until the chopping board split clean in half beneath Zoro's hand. "The hell?" Sanji turned, his eyes wide. "You dumb musclehead, fucking control your damn strength." He aimed a light kick to Zoro's shin, more annoyed than angry. Zoro didn't even react to that. He just stood there as Sanji grumbled angrily and pulled out a new chopping board. But when Sanji reached over to hand it to Zoro, he paused, his eyes going slightly wide at the scene of Zoro's hand trembling. Sanji blinked, before his own eyes landed on his own to find it doing the same. He sighed low and frustrated as he handed the board to Zoro. They returned to chopping, slower this time with silence stretching between them once again, but longer and heavier, pissing Sanji off, until the silence from the damn swordsman compelled him to snap. "What's your deal, Mosshead?" Sanji muttered without looking. Zoro grumbled, trying to play it off, but Sanji wasn't about to let him off now. "I said talk. Don't grumble at me," Sanji said, clearly frustrated by now. There was a moment's pause, before Zoro finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "I was gonna tell you about that. Which I avoided telling anyone. About Luffy." Sanji stiffened for a fraction of a second, before he cut him off sharply. "Don't. Not just to me." Zoro looked over, clearly surprised. Sanji didn't meet Zoro's eyes, he just kept chopping. "Whatever it is, the whole crew deserves to hear. Directly or indirectly. We all saw it." His voice dropped a little at the end, as the whimpering and bloodied face of Luffy re-emerged in his memories. Zoro's calm facade crumbled, and he stopped his knife mid-cut and rubbed a hand down his face. "Right, yeah, the entire crew deserves to know. It's just, my mind has been all over the place, since last night." Sanji's lips pressed into a thin line as he nodded with a slight grim expression. "I get it, but you should tell the entire crew if this is about Luffy, and about what happened." Zoro looked down, noticing the way Sanji's hand was trembling the same as his. But neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them would be able to sleep soundly tonight either. Neither would get peace until they knew what was going on, to make Luffy live and stay. But for now, they cooked together, preparing lunch in a more comfortable silence. And then, I kid you not, Usopp was saying dramatically, gesturing widely, this giant sky lobster came out of nowhere and snatched Luffy like he was a snack. "No, that wasn't what happened," Luffy said with a goofy grin, still lying flat on Ace's lap, with his arms sprawled. "The guy just wanted to see me." "But that thing picked you up, chomping on your butt," Usopp retorted, laughing. Bonnie nearly choked on her apple juice from laughing. "That's what you get for roaming around, being Nika." Ace, wiping tears from his eyes, was about to respond when a familiar coo echoed from above, making Luffy squeal, "Birdie," and spring up with the force of a little gremlin, nearly knocking him backward. The news coo, instead of squawking away in fright, landed right atop Luffy's outstretched hand, who scooped up the newspaper from its pouch while handling a piece of bacon and a hug to it in exchange. "You're da bestest, Birdie." The bird gave a long happy squeak and nibbled Luffy's cheek affectionately, like it was used to this by now, before flying away. You got a newspaper for free? Ace blinked, already holding onto Luffy, who flopped back down with the paper in his hand, sprawling over him once again. Yep. Luffy grinned, waving the newspaper at his face, making him freeze. And the others too, the moment they saw the front page. Chaos at G8. The three C's strike again. The bold headline screamed across the page, complete with blurry, chaotic photos of glitter-bombed Marines hiding their faces, but unable to hide their confused scowls and pen-drawn mustaches. Some were even busy trying to wash off the ink, but it would have clearly smudged it further. Others were seen forlornly gathering debris and supplies with defeated expressions. The G-8 base behind them looked like a haunted, abandoned ruin. Peeved. Look at this guy. Ace laughed, pointing to a Marine clearly in a ballet costume, which had to be indeed someone from his group's work. Sabo snorted. They look absolutely done with life. And they still called it an emergency. Bonnie doubled over with laughter. She. It was fun. Look, Usopp. The graffiti you made is still there, Luffy giggled. And below that very same article were ads from PPP almost as if they were having an identity crisis, occupying every corner of the page and thereafter. Like literally, they had ads for everything. From handcuffs, to unbreakable doors. From glitter removal polish to other metals. But one of them was something new, something which hasn't been posted before, a new product. Introducing the future of warfare. 3 PM the strongest metal known to man, exclusively from PPP. I want to break it already. Luffy grinned mischievously at the new challenge thrown by the PPP. The next page had the final kicker of the news, which had almost everyone frozen. Marines have deployed 2 admirals, and the hero of Marines to hunt down the 3 Cs. Please notify your nearest Marine base or officer if you see the Straw Hats ship surrounded by 2 ships with unrecognizable flags. Ace read for everyone. There was silence for a moment, before Luffy slowly rolled onto his back, the paper flopping over his face. Guess it's time to go, he mumbled, knowing that he can't fight the admirals right now, if caught, or protect his crew. Bonnie groaned and flopped onto her side, facing him. This sucks, I wanted to spend more time with you, while mooching off Sanji's cooking. Ace gently tugged the paper off Luffy's face and ruffled his hair, seeing his pout. Hey, we'll see each other soon, in the new world. Sabo nodded. Can't exactly take down the world government alone yet. But do lay low, you little idiot. But, Luffy pouted, sitting up slowly, lower lip wobbling dramatically. No god mode, Dragon said sternly, having overheard the conversation. Wah. Say with me. No going. Nika. For. Luffy. Dragon repeated, picking Luffy over from Ace's lap. Say it with me, Lu. Luffy pouted, crossing his eyes, before finally giving up, when even the winds, clouds, his mama, asked him to promise. No going Nika for Lu. Don't you break your promise, otherwise I'll come running to bonk you, understood? Sabo stated, getting up while picking Bonnie. Won't. Luffy pouted, hiding behind his dad's broad chest. Everyone finally relaxed at that, grinning. And as they gathered at the edges of their ship, ready to depart, Sanji appeared with Zoro, handing out neatly packed lunchboxes for everyone to take it with them. It was time to leave, and yet the hugs were long and the goodbyes dramatic. Clearly no one wanted to leave yet, but they had to. Bonnie gave Luffy a bear hug. Sabo gave him a back hug, while Ace gripped Luffy's hand firmly and leaned in close. Remember what we said? No reckless glowing god mode. We need you alive, alright? And no showing off using haki, just like we told you before. Silly Ace, I know, in the west shore of Jaya, Mocktown, the atmosphere felt suffocating with people having gathered all around a small tavern, watching the ongoing brawl with fear, shock and horror. The air felt heavy, scented with blood and spiced with cries. Please, please stop. A voice was crying, but not from pain, but despair. It belonged to none other than Big Dagger, Sarquis, whose hands were bleeding but none of it was his own blood. His voice was cracked, loud enough to silence the rowdy and panicked crowd surrounding him and his captain. The man once known for his slick tongue, steel resolve and worse ego was begging before the crowd, before his captain, before that man, with his giant dagger trembling in his hands. Sarquis didn't want this. He didn't like it. He hated every bit of it. Yet, his hands were moving anyway. Yet, his body was acting on its own, controlled via strings like a puppet to be controlled. I beg of you. Sarquis's hands were moved, and another slash across his captain's side was delivered. Why are you doing this? Let us go. What the hell? Whispers were already breaking out from the crowd gathered there. Some in astonishment, some in shock, some in confusion. Was Sarquis begging? But most of the onlookers' attention was not on the duo who were fighting for their lives. No, most of them were looking at the man who was sitting on a crate like a twisted vulture sizing his prey, looking for the best parts before discarding them. The man was squirming his fingers lazily in the air, and flashing his maniacal grin to everyone, making them shrivel in fear and watch out. Why, you ask? Even his voice seemed deadly, filled with scorn and taunt, making the whole crowd go silent. The man lifted his head to look at the pathetic display of beating in front of him, but it wasn't amusing him, because the captain, the street punk, Bellamy, didn't fight back. No, the guy didn't even scream when the blade sliced him, when his own friend, his own crew, attacked him. He twirled the Jolly Roger he had once given to Bellamy between his fingers, clearly able to see the false pride in it in the hands of the man who didn't deserve it a bit, because Bellamy, you shamed my sign. The crowd almost recoiled as the man picked his gaze from the flag to Bellamy, even if his gaze wasn't on them. Whether or not the Sky Island exists, whether the Golden City is myth or truth, these things, they don't interest me. He crisscrossed his legs, sitting in a position that commanded superiority. Before you act on such foolish dreams, you should have listened to the opinions of others. Someone in the back of the crowd gasped, isn't that guy Don Quixote Doflamingo? One of the 7 warlords of the sea? What is he doing here? No way. He once had a bounty of 300 million berry on his head. Doflamingo ignored them. I don't need punk-ass thugs who can't even recognize the weight of a sign they wear. Under my command, he took a step forward, each one deliberate, heavy and somehow louder than the murmuring around him. But if his aura was swallowing the alley like a black hole, then his dancing fingers were calling death upon his chosen one. Shit, my hands are moving on their own, Sarky sobbed, his eyes wide in terror and his hand holding his weapon in a tight grip as his joints moved on their own, towards an unprepared Bellamy, towards his best friend who was already too hurt and injured. Please stop, forgive us, ah. Bellamy fell. He fell on the ground, inhaling dust, coughing blood, with no strength in his limbs to stand back again. He was dizzy due to the blood loss, and yet he couldn't see anything other than his idol, other than Doflamingo, who was mercilessly hurting him, picking him apart using his own friend, making him a spectacle for his crew and others to see. But Bellamy didn't care. For Bellamy, others didn't matter, as long as Doflamingo was there, as long as he could serve him. That's why the once proud and haughty pirate, clawed into the dirt, pressed his forehead against the mud near Doflamingo's boots. Please. One chance. I will follow your every command. Bellamy, that's enough. Even the pirates under Bellamy's command were not able to see such a fucked up scene. They didn't want to see him bleeding, they didn't want to see him not fighting back, they didn't want him to be humiliated by the warlord. Because that meant they might be the next. Because that would mean their end. Bellamy paid them no heed, he continued groveling in the dirt, even though I had lost. Pathetic. Doflamingo sneered. You lost, not against a captain but a mere crew. And you still have the audacity to beg? Bellamy's broken ribs were making it harder for him to breathe, yet he rasped, the captain. He is a kid. Not a big deal, he wasn't there when we fought. So you let his crew mop the floor with you, Doflamingo stated with venom in his voice. Bellamy coughed, tasting iron. The kid is babysitted by his crew. I think the real strength is hidden inside, the crew not in the kid. Doflamingo snorted at that. Sure, he had no doubts that Straw Hat Luffy was a mere kid, but even kids can be dangerous. And the world government definitely isn't a fool for crowning the kid with 50 million berry bounty at the very beginning and then even inviting him for the warlord position. You lost. That's the only truth that matters, Doflamingo stated, turning away from his royal follower, who was nothing more than a fool now. But I never intended to disobey your orders. I swear on the sign. Bellamy cried, begging his idol to not leave him yet. If I hadn't picked that fight, that fake captain would have climbed to your position. Bellamy had hated it when he had read the news about that straw-hatted kid being invited to the position of a warlord. He had hated the thought of someone like that brat being in the same position as his most worshipped idol. And he hated him a lot more when he read the news of the very same brat getting a bounty of a 100 million berry. Doflamingo paused, he turned towards the groveling man on the ground, his smile twitching, but he didn't want to stay any moment there with that pathetic excuse. Cute sentiment, but I have no use for broken dogs. With that, the final verdict had been delivered, sautéed with Doflamingo's twitching fingers and sprinkled with Sarkis's scream, who was trying to stop himself but the strings had no mercy. They led him to drive the blade deep into Bellamy's gut, finally making Bellamy shriek in pain. Trash like you belong in the gutters of the world, Doflamingo snorted, before turning to the crowd, with his arms raised like a prophet, he continued, Foo. Hurry. A new age is coming, one where only the worthy will survive. All the worthless trash will vanish in the wave of the new age. The crowd of pirates were dead silent, as if witnessing the declaration for the new age. Duffy titled his head, as if he suddenly remembered something annoying. Speaking of new age, he clicked his tongue. That damned PPP has been eating into my market. They're little toys. They're flashing gadgets that they claim the 3 C's can't break. The Marines are loving them. The people use it, no matter the price. All of them are blind. Even today's newspaper proves this. He crouched beside Bellamy, grabbing his bloody chin with his hand. Did you know, Bellamy? They use workers, also known as slaves, he whispered for only the guy to hear. Children. Men. Women. All beaten, broken, starved and worked to the bones. And bodies worth less than your spine. Bellamy whimpered. Doflamingo smiled wider. Maybe I'll sell you to them. Give them something worthless to toss in their factories. The last of the footsteps had faded beyond the walls of the Going Merry, taking with them the joy and relief and leaving just plain tension behind. At least that's the case for everyone, except one. But inside the galley, the quiet tension was worse. It was too quiet for a ship that had hosted the Spades and the Revolutionary was only the faint creaking of the ship and the occasional lapping of the waves that was daring to interrupt the hush veiling it. Sanji was standing alone near the stove, with a cigarette burning between his lips. The smoke was curling around him like a ribbon, almost blending in with the steam wafting off the pots and pans. He wasn't rushing. There was no need to rush anymore. The plates had already been set down by Zoro, each of them overseen by him. The food was made beforehand, just needed to be reheated, with each dish tailored to everyone's tastes. There was his spicy seafood pasta along with black tea, Nami's favorite tangerine glazed sweets, Usopp's tender roasted fish with a light sauce, Robin's delicately spiced sandwiches with flour-cut vegetables, Chopper's veggie medley along with berry parfait, Zoro's grilled sea beast meat with white rice and sake, and Luffy's all-time favorite mountain of meats. It was a meal that would be devoured within seconds with smiling faces on any other day, but today was not that day. Sanji turned towards the door, peeking out of the galley to find others still looking towards the ocean, towards the departing ships. It wasn't because they had nothing better to do, but rather, they didn't know what to do now. But most probably, Sanji knew that everyone would be drowning in their own guilt and uselessness if they were left alone. "Food's ready," Sanji called out, not expecting any excitement or response. One by one, the Straw Hats trickled in, with Zoro still carrying Luffy, not letting him walk on his own. Because when he did that on his own the last time, he was on the verge of falling in the treacherous seas. Even though it won't harm him, none of them really want to see him disappear from their sight for even a moment right now. There were no words, except for Luffy humming happily while swinging his legs, the shuffling of the feet and the scraping of the chairs against wood, and lastly, a few mumbling thanks. "Wah! More food!" Luffy excitedly chirped the moment his eyes set on the huge mountain of meat awaiting him. "Sanji, you're the best!" he cheered, practically launching himself into the plate the moment he was seated down. He grabbed the first piece of meat and chomped down like a starved being, his cheeks bulging comically, almost adorably as he chewed. "MMMMFGHH, so good." Sanji truly wanted to say, "Will ya slow down a bit?" But seeing Luffy finally energetic while eating his food stopped him. But unlike Luffy, the others weren't nearly as enthusiastic, even at the sight of their favorite food and the delicious smell wafting from it. Usopp was poking his roast with a fork, pushing it around in small circles as if it was something foreign. Even Nami was stirring her fillet with a knife, not even bothering to lift a bite to her mouth. And Robin, she just sipped from her teacup, not even touching the beautifully made sandwiches. While Chopper had taken a single bite of his veggies and kept nibbling on that one piece like a rabbit, with his eyes downcast. Sanji noticed it all. He frowned and watched as the food, which he'd poured so much care into, sat mostly untouched. But the truth was that even he didn't feel like eating today. He didn't have any appetite for even his most prized dish. Only Luffy was eating like normal, if not more so. But even so, he wouldn't waste food. Sanji glanced at Zoro, who shrugged, noticing the awkwardness too, pushed his plate over to Luffy and uncorked his sake. Luffy looked up at Zoro, before a bright grin spread over his face and he reached over, forking the extra food. "Thanks, R.O."
Not hungry, Zoro muttered. Sanji's patience was running thin. He knew he didn't have any appetite and the others might be feeling the same, but that didn't mean they had enough energy to even wallow in guilt. None of them had taken a bite of anything for a while, most of them hadn't even eaten since yesterday, and that was too long on his watch.
"What the hell is wrong?" he muttered under his breath, knowing the answer fully. "It's like a funeral here." The words were meant to stay quiet, but the silence was just so loud that they rang like a bell. Luffy blinked and looked up, his cheeks stuffed like a hamster. "Huh? What are you talking about, Sanji? It's delicious. Everyone should eat, right, guys?" No one responded, not even picking themselves up to look at Luffy. Luffy tilted his head, confused. "No one's eating?" He looked at each of them, his eyes scanning their faces and plates one by one. Usopp's lips were thin, pressed together like he might cry if he opened them. Nami's eyes were vacant, almost as if she looked at him she might break down. Robin looked calm, but with the way her fingers were trembling told another story. Chopper was chewing the same bite like it was rubber, while being lost in his own thoughts. Even Sanji hadn't taken a bite from his plate and Zoro had just given him all of his. Luffy's smile faltered. "Come on, guys," he said with a chuckle that came out a little too loud, a little too forced. "Don't look so gloomy. We're all here, right? I'm here now, and that's what matters." He grinned and waved his chopsticks, determined to bring joy. "The food's gonna cry if you guys don't eat them. Or Sanji will scold you all." It was a jab worth picking, But Sanji merely rolled his eyes. Or, how Zoro will get lost if he doesn't eat some meat. He continued, grinning, teeth showing, as he lifted some meat in his fork and pushed towards Zoro. Luffy almost looked like a kid who was desperately trying to fix a broken toy with duct tape and a smile, but Zoro didn't even look up. He didn't glare, he just took another sip of his sake, painfully clenching his fists below the table and drowning his guilt with a bottle. Luffy's shoulders slumped, barely noticeable but there. He turned to Chopper, not wanting to give up. "Hey, Chopper, you like veggies? You can have mine too. Sanji always hides them in my food," he pouted, ignoring the slight glare from Sanji. Chopper gave a half-hearted smile and shook his tiny head. "You need them, Luffy. I have plenty on my plate." "Then what about you, Usopp? Want to tell an amazing story today?" Luffy tried harder, but Usopp just shook his head, his mouth still shut. He turned to Nami, his eyes almost glossy by now. "Would Nami like some sweets then? It has a tangy flavor." Ace gave them, but even that didn't work as Nami merely shook her head and started sipping a glass of water to avoid talking. "Robin, would you then like to know about something?" Luffy tried once again, but even that didn't work as Robin just smiled half-heartedly before continuing sipping her tea. Luffy's shoulders slumped as he looked down at his already half-empty plate. "You guys really aren't gonna eat, huh?" His voice was soft, not sad but just disappointed. He could sense the drop in the mood, the crew's inner feelings as if his own. He knew what they wanted. He sighed, setting his fork down and leaned back in his chair with a new vigor and determination. "Fine, I get it." The crew finally looked up, finally showing at least some expression on their faces. "I know what you want to ask," Luffy stated, meeting each of their eyes. His usual cheer was dulled around the edges as rare seriousness took its place. "So just ask. Ask anything. I'll try to answer them with my best." The silence that followed Luffy's open invitation was deafening. No one had expected him to say that. They hadn't expected him to be that self-aware and have such observation skills. So, for a moment no one moved. No one spoke even when the table was heavy with the weight of so many unspoken things. But then, slowly, Chopper whispered, Are you really okay now?" Luffy blinked, then grinned. "Yep, stop thinking I'm weak. I'm not. I might not be as tall as I should be, but that doesn't mean I need babying." Luffy poked his tongue out. Usopp was next, even though his question sounded more like a sob. How did you come back from the dead?" Usopp's voice cracked halfway through the question after asking it as if saying it out loud might curse Luffy once again to death. Luffy beamed, stuffing some meat into his mouth happily, now that finally everyone was picking on their food too. "I'm not completely sure, but I am pretty sure it was Mama and Vinny who brought me back." "Mama?" Robin echoed, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "Vinny?" "Yeah. Mama always comes or calls me when I am hurt," Luffy said with mouth full. "And Vinny's super cool. She's weird. But cool. I barely get to see her anymore. She doesn't visit me." Oh, she's made up of different animals and stuff. Sometimes a wolf, sometimes like a deer." Luffy beamed, completely confident in his answer. The crew looked at each other, unable to process the answer in a way that wouldn't shake their worldview. "Made of animals? Wolf? Deer?" Sanji repeated slowly, confirming to himself that whoever the being is, it's not human. But why would they be? If they had the power to bring back the dead, then such a being could only be something otherworldly. Meanwhile, Robin tilted her head, intrigued, but also clearly confused. Though she could deduct some points. Are they gods too? The question wasn't meant to be asked aloud, but it happened, and so did the flicker in Luffy's smile. "I guess you could say that." "Your sibling?" Zoro questioned with an intrigued expression. They already knew about Halid, the former god of sky, who was dead. But with Luffy's words, he could deduce that there might be more. "Yes," Luffy answered softly. "Luffy, why do you always get sick after using your devil fruit power?" Nami's voice came, worried and sharp. "Don't call it a devil fruit," Luffy cut in, his tone shifting like a knife through the air, and his voice was low, serious, sharp enough to pierce bone. "It's not that. It never was and never will be." That caught everyone off guard, especially the lack of smile on his face and his unfamiliar red eyes glimmering and peeking from the straw hat on his head. It almost squashed all the questions from the straw hats, even though they had still plenty of them swirling inside their mind. But not Sanji's, whose eyes flicked towards Zoro, before he nudged his calf under the table, hard. "Stop that," Zoro hissed at Sanji. Sanji didn't say anything. He just glared at Zoro, wanting him to spill the beans now. Zoro scowled before sighing, knowing that he had no way out of it now. "Luffy, can I tell them what you told me that day? About how much time you have left?" The air dropped a few degrees at that single sentence, hitting the table like a tidal wave. Nami's knife clattered. Usopp sat up straight. Robin's eyes widened. Chopper stopped chewing. Sanji's cigarette fell to the ground. And Luffy froze, like a deer in headlights. Instead of shock, dread was looming on the table this time, with so many questions rising and spiraling. "What?" Nami breathed. Chopper's mouth opened and closed like a drowning fish. Time left. You gonna leave us again? Usopp cried, his eyes glossy. The heck? Sanji's mouth was hanging, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. And Zoro was hiding this secret from everybody. He truly wanted to kick the damn moss brain in the head to make him understand that he could not carry that huge secret all on his damn fucking shoulders. Luffy didn't speak for a few seconds. His shoulders were tense, his jaw frozen, not even finishing the bite of the food which he had been eating for a while. Sure, he finally mumbled, too softly. Go ahead, he said without looking up, but then like nothing was wrong. He picked up a piece of fish and took a slow, almost distracted bite, as if he didn't want to acknowledge the truth himself. As if he didn't want to accept the bitter truth which he knew was coming for him. Zoro took a long, measured breath, his eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table, which all of a sudden felt too interesting. He told me, Zoro started, his voice low. He told me that piece of him, his divine powers, whatever you want to call it, was never meant to return back. He gave it up, on purpose, willingly. But it's no longer staying hidden. It's not letting him stay human for long. Chopper's ear twitched. Wait, gave it up, you mean? Zoro nodded. He pushed part of it away. Maybe to live like us. Maybe to feel like us. Zoro looked at Luffy, who nodded quietly. But now, it's coming back. With every battle. Every step forward. Every damn adversity. It pulls more of that godhood back into him. Robin's gaze sharpened. So, it's not just using the power that's killing him. It's getting it back that killed him. I think so, Luffy mumbled. Zoro paused, waiting for Luffy to give any more inputs, and when he saw the guy not doing so, he continued. I think his mortal body wasn't built to carry that weight. That divine power, Nika, Joyboy, call it whatever. It's like a wildfire in a paper house. Usopp's veil paled. So, it's not that he's burning out, he's being overridden. And he's still smiling through it like an idiot, Sanji muttered, clenching his fists. Zoro stared ahead, because that's the part that even he won't say out loud. Zoro muttered, watching as Luffy's face was slowly hiding behind his straw hat. He knew he was hitting the nail, he knew he was telling the truth, but that didn't mean he wanted to see Luffy like this. That he's scared, Nami whispered. Zoro shook his head, that it's his choice. And true, it was all Luffy's choice. Whenever his body had turned into his original self, it was solely because he wanted it, he needed it. Only once was it forced, but since then the whole dam, which was stopping the powers from flowing in, had cracked. Luffy told me, once, if I gotta fight destiny just to stay with you guys, I'll fight it. I'll fight the whole damn world. Zoro continued, his voice barely steady, but he still forced himself to continue. But you didn't do that, Luffy. You broke that promise when you died. You didn't fight destiny, you didn't stay. Zoro's words hung in the air like a slap to his face. He could hear the wind brushing against the Mary's hull, but couldn't hear the clink of his own fork on ceramic. The way his hands trembled ever so slightly before dropping back to the table. Luffy didn't look up. He couldn't. His face was already mostly hidden beneath the brim of his straw hat now, casting long shadows that danced over the food he was no longer eating. Zoro, Luffy whispered, but it barely passed his lips. Like he truly wanted to respond but didn't know what words could make it right. Do you know what it felt like, Luffy? Nami spoke next, her voice brittle, knuckles white, and the dam of emotions within her finally breaking to pieces. Seeing you dying? Watching you take your last breath? Usopp's eyes were streaming with tears by now. I wasn't even there for you. I didn't even know about it. I couldn't do anything, and it damn fucking hurts. That power killed you. You staying in your god mode for goddamn 4 days chipped at your body, Sanji said flatly, not even pretending anymore to hold in his rage and anxiety. And now it's crawling back into you, eating you alive while you goof around, and say, I'm fine, and I'm not weak. Like we're just supposed to watch without knowing any damn thing. The pressure in the room was rising with each of them finally letting go of their emotions and saying them out loud. And yet, Luffy didn't lift his head, his shoulders stayed hunched. I didn't want you guys to worry, he mumbled. Too bad, Chopper cried, his voice shaking. I am worried. I am terrified, Luffy. Every time I feel like my doctor skills aren't working, I feel helpless. Useless. I don't know what to do, I don't know how I can help you. So, why am I a doctor if I can't do anything? Sorry, Chopper, Luffy whispered, before he exhaled shakily, but I meant it, you know. When I said I'd fight destiny, he finally looked up and the crew froze because his smile wasn't goofy. It wasn't soft, it was broken and scared. I am Luffy said, his voice steadier than his face. Every time my body pulses erratically. Every time my flesh bleeds. Every time I command the winds. Every time I push myself hard. Every damn time I feel free. It's almost like I am carrying the sun inside my chest, and it burns. It hurts. It hurts so much, Luffy's lips curved into a broken smile. But a smile nonetheless. But I stay. I bear all of this. Every single time. I still crave freedom. I still crave this. Home. You guys. So, I come back. Why didn't you tell us any sooner? Sanji asked, quietly. Why carry the weight alone? Because we are weak. Because we are not stronger and you always end up protecting us. Sanji gritted his teeth, feeling weak. No, it's just because I didn't want you to be scared, Luffy answered, looking at each of them, one by one. His crew, his family. Well, Nami muttered, too late for that, dumbass. Luffy grinned weakly. Yeah, I figured. Well, no going Nika for you, from now, Zoro stated, sitting straight. But, Luffy started, eyes wide, already protesting. No, Zoro cut in firmly, tone brooking no argument. We will fight together if any strong enemy comes. All of us. That's the whole damn point of being a crew. So, no going Nika. No burning your body for our sake, not again. Yeah, Usopp puffed his chest out. What's the point of being the world's greatest sniper if my captain keeps burning himself and dying before I get to show off? You're not our weapon, Luffy, Robin said gently. You're our captain. You got to lead us, not burn till death. You're not allowed to make choices that leave us behind, dumbass, Nami added, arms crossed, eyes red but determined. Chopper sniffed, nodding. I'll fix you but I won't let you break again just to protect us. Sanji exhaled a long puff of smoke. You fight with us, Luffy. Not ahead of us, with us. There was a long beat before Luffy gave a small, breathless laugh. You guys are real bossy today. And you are finally listening, Nami smirked. Luffy took off his straw hat, showing his still white streaked hair at the edges and his reddish eyes the permanent changes in his being. Okay, he said. I'll try. No more going Nika unless there's no other choice, I promise. Zoro narrowed his eyes. You better mean it. I do, Luffy nodded. But if it ever comes down to choosing between my life or yours, I am choosing. We'll kick your ass before it comes to that, Sanji cut in smoothly. Or after, Zoro added. Both, Chopper squeaked. And finally Luffy laughed, loud and bright with his head thrown back and his chest rising and falling like the weight had cracked down at least a little. The sea was stretched out like a lazy painting with blues and clouds hanging low along with the sun already halfway done with its shift. But amidst it, a thin CRRK echoed across the calm waters as a line of ice paved itself across the seas of the Grand Line, without any fear of the weather becoming treacherous any moment. And riding that line, half asleep and half bored, was none other than Admiral Aokiji, aka Kuzan. Man, this is such a drag. He mumbled, one hand lazily resting on the handlebars of his ice bike while the other adjusted his sleep mask slightly above his eyes. Why'd I keep getting pulled into this stuff? I'm practically on vacation. His breath was fogging the cold mist curling off the frozen path below. He wasn't in a hurry though, not really. But his mind wasn't exactly idle either. It was just lazy enough to take detours around thoughts which were not adding up. That G8 mess, though, he muttered. 3 brats wrecking everything then vanishing like ghosts. He frowned, not liking the extra work burdened on his shoulders. But something doesn't add up. His brow twitched under his mask, trying to concentrate on the matter, but then laziness and procrastination was something Kuzan actively hunted for, if he could. And what Kuzan found when his eyes opened slightly was scattered planks, torn sails and a mess of drifting figures just bobbing on the waves ahead. There were floating wreckage and among it were people who were screaming, scrambling and flailing. That made sense considering the record-breaking horrible weather yesterday around the seas of the G-8 base, all of which is the doing of the 3 seas. Kuzan sighed. He truly didn't want to make this problem his own, but he was a Marine, an admiral and his primary job was to help the civilians. So, with a lazy roll of his wrist, he made the ocean hiss and crackle as ice bloomed outward in a wide crescent, forming a flat, steady platform for the drifters, who were way too large in numbers and didn't waste a second in hauling each other up with wide eyes and frostbitten fingers. Holy crap, there's so many, Aokiji blinked, clearly able to see the 200 to 300 of the survivors practically exploding onto the ice, flopping and crying and bowing and cheering. All of them were dressed in fancy, showy clothes with striped patterns, mismatched hats and sparkly outfits that made them look like a circus crew, which they actually can be. Aokiji was turning to leave, wanting to have no part in the further rescue or ridiculousness of the circus crew, but before he could actually do that, one of them strutted up to him. Probably the leader of the jesters. He was tall-ish with a chunky middle and spindly limbs, with hair that jutted up into 2 pointy tufts and a cleft-lipped, fox-laced grin plastered on his red-nosed mug. To Kuzan, the man looked like a rejected carnival mascot filled to the brim with confidence only. Ah, the great savior, the man said with dramatics. I'm Foxy, thanks for saving the Foxy. Aokiji was already deadpanning, as he raised a hand to stop the blabbering man. He truly didn't have the energy to deal with the jester now. Ice paths that way. Go walk before you talk me into freezing you solid. The man, foxy for a fox, blinked, before his eyes widened and he dashed towards his crew, never turning back again. Aokiji didn't wait till they were far enough to leave. He sighed, geez. Foxy pirates, huh? So, they're still alive? But well, he is not here today to capture these small-time ones, so with a flick of his wrist, He turned his front wheel and kept riding as the ice path kept reforming beneath him with each lazy push of the pedal. It was only an hour later when he spotted an island with green plains and ridiculously tall trees and animals in it. But that didn't catch the attention of the Admiral the most. It was the Going Merry which did. Nestling against the shore, swaying gently with the waves like it hadn't just been guided out by two strange ships this very morning. Aokiji squinted. There were no signs of fires, no battle signs, no torn sails. Hell, there wasn't a single scratch on the ship. And the occupants of the ship were all enjoying themselves on the shore side, having a picnic party while playing in the waters or talking to a short man. And in the center of it all was Monkey D. Luffy, the kid said to be targeted by the Three Seas relentlessly. Well, that saves me the search, he whispered. After all, it was either the Three Seas ship or the Straw Hats. It has been 17 human years since Nico was reborn. 17 fleeting, mortal years, which was just a blink in the divine realm of time, and yet Aramai could remember the moment clearly. The tether between the soul and flesh that had been stitched anew without his knowledge, without his consent. And that should have been impossible. Nika shouldn't have been born in the first place. He shouldn't have to be trapped in a mortal body for the humans who don't even value him. He should have been doing his duties diligently, and yet every time he fled like a coward, away from his grasp and into the cycle of mortal curse, choosing the cursed life over his divine one. It was almost insulting, how easily Nico was always ready to abandon them all. And Aramai, the Warden of Stone and Silence, hated it. Nika had died just a few moments ago, at least by human reckoning. The thread of Nika's mortal life had frayed, snapped, and he was expected to return. And Aramai was ready the moment he caught wind of it, to handle Nika's soul with care and give him one more chance to show that he was not abandoning them, but it didn't happen. Aramai had waited. He had stood atop the endless mountains of souls and stone that marked his domain, listening for the soft shuffle of Nika's soul. But there were no signs, no flicker, no laughter. Nothing but silence. It was already too long for Nika's soul to have crossed the threshold, to descend into Aramai's realm where he would have been given the chance to choose or endure. But the gates of the underworld never saw Nika's soul. All it saw were some mortals, not the divine. Because the line to Nika's soul had been severed. It hadn't taken the third Violenta god long to understand. He had scoured the threads, traced the divine echoes, and found the cause in just a few milliseconds. The unmistakable signature of Artibel. Her power lingering like a sap on his own. Golden. That wasn't hers. Not her own power. Not her own will, but his and his alone. Their father, the Almighty, had made them all with purpose. Each Violenta god's siblings carved from thoughts, gifted dominion over a part of the world, nature itself. But each one of them had also been gifted with a spark of shared dominion, a silver of power that could be tapped across divine bloodlines. But none of them ever did, because to reach into another's dominion with purpose was an offense. And yet, Artibel, the wild sister of his, the untamed soul of the forests, who was never meant to touch death, who was chaos and life herself, with nature's fangs and mercy, who never gave second chances, had done just that. She had broken her own vow and, worse, used his power, the power of death and rebirth, to bring Nika back. Aramai had felt it. The moment his power was being used. The moment Artibel's forestry green eyes had turned golden. The moment the cycle of death and rebirth had been trespassed, pulling Nika back from where he was meant to be locked. It had been Artibel's hand but his authority, her voice but his sentence reversed. She had broken the law of death, of divine punishment, and she had done it all deliberately. Because Nika, his dearest youngest brother, should have been returned to him. He should have died. His thread should have been snapped, away from those humans for whom he was giving himself away. But instead, Nika lived. Lived again among those very humans who would always be the cause of his death. Artibel had not simply interfered. She had chosen Nika, above all the laws and silent vows, above destiny and order, above Aramai himself. It was already worse that Nika would always use their powers unknowingly, but now even Artibel was joining him, but knowingly. And because of that, Aramai couldn't reach his foolish, dumb little brother. The realm of death didn't have any hold on Nika. The gates would not open for Nika unless he died again, and next time, even Artibel's interference would not be tolerated by him because the balance had been broken once. Aramai stepped down from his throne, with his jaw clenched as the silence around him deepened. The winds had been too strong, even for the new world. The storms had been shrieking for murder. The waves had been restless, almost too much. Everything felt not just strong, not just wild, but too wrong. The nature itself felt like twisting in unnatural spirals, hurling fury and madness without direction, thrumming with something otherworldly. It wasn't a storm that just formed out of nowhere in the new world. No, it felt called. Standing on the deck of the Red Force, Shanks narrowed his eyes towards the horizon where the blackish-red clouds were devouring the bloody sea, with lightning blooming unnaturally golden in the distance, almost tethering to black. Luffy. Ben murmured beside him, already knowing where Shanks's thoughts were. You can feel it too, huh? Shanks didn't respond immediately. He only watched the clouds roll like beasts, with his grip on the hilt of Griffin tightening. Almost all storms this bad are tied to him these days, Shanks muttered after a while, his voice low but firm. That sunshine of ours. It's never quiet when he's not alright. Usopp, reading the paper under the dripping edge of the mast, clicked his tongue and held it up. You're gonna want to see this. G-8 is obliterated. Obliterated? That base? Lucky Roo echoed, his usual grin nowhere in sight. Yep. Ridiculed. Looks almost abandoned like a ghostly base now. And guess who they're blaming? Usopp grinned, turning the page to reveal the bold headline. Chaos at G8. The 3 C's strike again. There was no photo of the 3 C's, just a speculation and untrustworthy witness accounts of shadowy figures moving like ghosts, with the base left to rot like it had been hit by disasters upon disasters. But anyone with a brain and a bit of sea sense could feel who'd been there. Shanks stared at the headline, his eyes narrowing at the familiar name and mind swirling with questions. I thought only that blonde brat was active, but G8? That's not exactly a target, Ben Beckman stated as he lowered the cigarette from his lips. Usopp exhaled slowly, letting the paper flutter in the wind, but there was something that incurred their mischief. But what? Lucky Roo frowned, brows furrowed. Was it sunshine? That warlord invitation sure had to piss him off. Maybe, Ben muttered. But I didn't expect Luffy to do this. Alone, at least. He might have roped his crew and did, but something still doesn't make sense. Maybe he was trying to follow Ace. Anchored as that, Usopp provided, remembering that good old laugh he had. Ace literally made the world government regret sending him an invitation to join the warlords. No, something had to happen on top of this, Shanks said quietly. The wind howled through the sails again, louder this time, as if agreeing to his words. He could feel that the original storm had receded the one casted due to rage and something else, but the remnants were still there, gnashing its teeth like a beast, ready to tear anything apart. Shanks glanced downwards to find the sea churning violently, swallowing chunks of foam, before looking up toward the black-red clouds again. This is a storm made from fury. Lucky Roo looked back at him. So then, was it all 3 of them? Ace and Sabo too? Ace was seen heading towards the G8 base in a hurry by our sources, so he was likely there, Ben replied after taking a puff from his almost soggy cigarette. But why the urgency? Is something wrong? Shanks didn't answer. He had already asked this question to himself several times but couldn't find anything to satisfy his anxiety. But he refused to give up. He needed to know if the boys were okay. If Luffy was okay. So, he reached again into his pocket and pulled out his Den Den Mushi, clicked it on and waited after dialing the number. But it was the same again. Luffy didn't pick up. Shanks tried another 2. But neither did Ace nor Sabo answer once again. None of them are picking up, Shanks cursed, his voice tense beneath the calm mask as happened. Something bad enough to drag. Most probably, all 3 of them to a small base like G8. He exhaled through his nose, pinching the bridge of it. And they're not answering me, which means, Shanks refused to finish the statement, or to even think about it. None of the commanders gathered on the deck answered, all of them feeling their stomachs churn at the implications. You 3 better be okay, Shanks muttered while looking towards the red line separating him and the brats. Because if you're not, he stopped, shook his head, then growled. Next time I see the idiots, I'm stealing their Viver cards myself. To hell with all those complaints and excuses. Usopp blinked. Is this what parenting feels like? Probably worse, Lucky Roo muttered. The data wasn't making any sense, no matter how many times he recalculated it. But by all logic of science and laws of nature, it should have made sense. After all, numbers always made sense, especially in the case of tides, wind pressure, sea current velocity, wave height, which were all crunched and converted into graphs and neat little lines across his specialized weather monitor. Vegapunk stood alone in his lab, his eyes locked on the central monitor where the simulation replayed once again. The sea storm that had torn through the region surrounding the G8 Marine base. Violent, erratic and almost mythical in its magnitude. It was by all scientific metrics, the most destructive marine phenomenon to be ever recorded in over 800 years. Second only to that storm that brought silence, whose only mention was in classified doents or poneglyphs. That storm had wiped out history, and this one should have wiped out G-8, and yet, it hadn't. The G8 base still stood. Cracked, damaged and ghostly, but intact enough for the infamous 3 Cs to break into, vandalize and leave chaos behind. And the worst part was, not even the Marines were awake enough to witness the chaos that unfolded in their own base. Not even they witnessed the storm that was unleashed upon them, which should have either submerged them with the base or reduced them to corpses buried under rubble. Yet, the G-8 had survived. No storm of that size would spare a structure that fragile, Vegapunk muttered under his breath, as he watched the simulation unfold again. Unless it wasn't controlled, trying not to destroy the base completely. The sea had raged, yes. The storms had gone wild, asking for blood. The skies had gone bloody, demanding murder. But it had not all been mindlessly. There had been a rhythm to it, controlled by strings, controlled by something, as if the storm had known what to crush and what to spare. Vegapunk's gaze flicked to another part of the monitor system. A side panel which was now displaying a digital archive of bounty posters, time-stamped photographs, incident logs, and intercepted radio signals. All of them related to the crew that had come to be known and feared as the 3 Cs. The interface had auto-organized the posters by date of release. It was a clear timeline of escalation, from low-risk anomalies to global threats. And that only for a crew having 3 people. 3 men. 3 names. 3 nightmares for the world government. And yet, something stood out. He tapped on the earliest posters, zooming in. The first thing he noticed was their height. The one known as Red Maniac, Syra, was strikingly short and lean, almost deceptively so. At first glance, the guy barely looked like a threat. And even now, despite the explosive bounty attached to his name, Syra remained slight in frame with narrow shoulders and thin limbs. He was chaos incarnate in silhouette and yet small. Not stunted, yet deliberate. Like his body had resisted the natural pull of time, aging in defiance of the laws that shaped mortals. Vegapunk's frown deepened, as he observed that others, Orange Wrath, Coal and Blue Sly, Cyan, were different. Their bodies had changed. Broadened, hardened and grown taller. And that was the usual telltale signs of adolescence warping into adulthood. The line of the jaw, the only visible part apart from their mouth. The weight of their stance. The confidence behind every movement recorded in surveillance footage. Vegapunk rewound through those handful clips over and over again, noticing how Cole moved like a firestorm with fists, how Cyan moved like a shadow with a twisted grin, and Syra danced effortlessly, unnaturally, almost as if the gravity around him was almost non-existent. They weren't stunted. They were children. Vegapunk acknowledged, letting the truth settle like a dead weight in the air. And wasn't that the most unnerving thing of all? That children, mere children, had done all of this, and they weren't slowing down at all. Despite their age, they had quickly climbed into the ranks of the world's most dangerous pirates, each with a bounty of over 1 billion berries on their head. Vegapunk didn't care about bounties though, he never had. What concerned him more was the pattern. The 3 Cs didn't chase treasure. They were toppling kingdoms, though the recent was something else entirely, or claim territory, or aim for control. Their targets were always precise. Always valuable. Always secret. From even scientific research facilities to data vaults buried beneath marine outposts, they stole only information files, classified logs, forbidden texts in disguise of bringing havoc. And that was not the work of pirates. No, this was the work of revolutionaries. Vegapunk paced slowly, hands behind his back as he spoke aloud to the room filled only with silent machinery. The world government thinks they're pirates because that's easier to control, easier to explain to the public. But if 3 children-turned men have spent years hunting down classified intel, breaching facilities, and avoiding the cipher pole or even admirals, then they're not only chasing chaos simply. He stopped in front of a frozen image of the storm over G8, the final puzzle in his question. They're chasing the truth, hidden by the world government. But what did G8 have? As per as Vegapunk knew, none of the doents in G8 were classified, nothing was important in that base. So, why did the 3 Cs chose that base to wreak havoc and bring storm in? Why chase a truth that didn't have any clue attached to the G8? But somewhere in all of this was a name, hidden meticulously, yet there. Halid. The Lord of Skies and Tempest. The one with control over the storms and skies. A name scrubbed from history. A name he had only found in the most forbidden of texts, in the poneglyphs. Or the kind stored in basements below level 6 of impelled down or passed away orally by tribes the world government had long tried to extinguish. According to the fragmented records which he had found after much hard work, Halad's power didn't manifest like a devil fruit. He was born with it, and it resonated with the sea itself, leading people to call him God. Vegapunk had never believed in gods. Science was his religion. But when the sea moved like that storm had moved, like it was reciprocating, like it was too raging and wanting to tear down anything in its path, he couldn't ignore the possibility. One of them, he whispered. One of the 3 Cs carried Halad's will. He wanted to study it, desperately. He wanted to analyze every part of that storm. He wanted to know more about Halid. He wanted to delve into his mystery and the connection of the 3 Cs with him. But he couldn't. Not right now. Because that would require funding, resources and time. All of which were currently funneled elsewhere to a certain someone, named Jinan Carver. Vegapunk's expression twisted ever so slightly, just enough for the monitor to pick up his facial change and adjust the lighting accordingly. Jinan Carver, one of the most renowned scientists in an era that had seen names like Caesar Clown, Vinsmoke Judge, and even himself. But unlike them, Carver had no signature, no theme, no fingerprint. His work spanned everything and nothing. And most recently, weapons designed for the PPP he didn't, but instead dipped his hands into every one of them, effortlessly. Vegapunk didn't want to think about him right now. Hence, his eyes returned to the image of the 3 Cs. They weren't anomalies anymore. Not even only a global level threat. There was something far more, something the world government was not ready to acknowledge. Because if the power of the storm god, Halid, receded in one of the three seas, then the world's balance was already shifting again, in the hands of people who were chasing truth. The sea was silent. It wasn't trashing too wildly. It wasn't like the chaotic waters of the Grand Line. It wasn't like the mother being playful with her son. But rather she was a mother who was worried for her son's well-being, who was sitting just on the figurehead of his ship laughing and listening to the stories brought by the winds, playing with his crew. The sea wanted her child in her arms. She wanted to check for herself once again if Nico was doing good. She wanted to have him for herself until Nico was completely fine. But she couldn't. She had already kept him in her seas, in her far embrace for a day, and knew that her son was getting restless. That he needed land to play and laugh and explore. Hence, keeping her heart at a distance, she pulled back the curtain of the mist to unveil the long island. Land ahead! Usopp shouted from the crow's nest, squinting hard even through his binoculars like he didn't believe what he was seeing. Or, land strip, is it even land? It's huge. No, long. Like really, really long, Chopper stated, amazed as he leaned over the railing. Indeed, the long island lived up to its absurd name. The island was stretched out like someone had taken the edges of the land and pulled it from both ends. And as far as the eye could see, it was like a canvas painted in endless soft greens and speckled with long, swaying trees that looked like they had been pulled upwards by something stronger. Luffy was already leaning far over the bow, his eyes sparkling in excitement. She, I bet there's so much fun stuff on that island, he said, practically vibrating as his straw hat sat tilted back, catching the light like a halo. You say that about every island, Zoro commented, his voice calm and amused, yet his eyes noting every moment of Luffy, making sure that the idiot doesn't fall over. But this one feels fun. Luffy turned with a grin, his red eyes wide and shiny with unadulterated excitement. And look at that. It's all grass. So much grass, I want to roll in it. There are no mountains, Robin noted, as a soft smile played on her lips as she stepped up beside Nami. How unusual. Flat or not, if it's land, it must have some food. Sanji lit a cigarette as his gaze flicked sideways to his hyperactive captain. Oi, Luffy, don't even think about running away all alone. But it was too late. After all, Luffy didn't wait. He never waited when there was an island to explore. With a loud, carefree whoop, Luffy leapt off the Going Merry, his legs barely steady on the railing before he launched himself toward the shore, laughing wildly and freely. His descent wasn't too graceful, with his legs slightly wobbling when he landed and knees buckling for just a second. But he bounced back up to his feet, laughing. Luffy! Chopper cried out, rushing to the railing. His hooves trembled slightly, his ears flattening with worry. He's not fully healed yet. While Zoro was already vaulting over the railing. Damn idiot, he muttered, but there was no true anger in his voice. He had known this was coming since the moment Usopp announced about the land. He had known it, that Luffy would vault himself off the ship in excitement, yet his heart and mind wasn't ready to leave Luffy unattended yet. We just got him back, and he's already trying to kill himself again? Sanji muttered, flicking ash off the side of the ship before jumping down after them. Let's go, Usopp voiced, leaping down the ship using the normal way with Chopper, Nami and Robin. Even though he was afraid of what the island might hold, what dreaded enemy might appear, or what monsters might lurk in the island, he refused to cave into fear anymore. The crew slowly but surely caught up to Luffy, who was already halfway into a sprint across the green plains, his arms thrown back in excitement. Guys, look, Luffy shouted, pointing widely ahead. At first, there was nothing, before a rabbit hopped past them. Or rather, a thing that looked like a rabbit but with a really long body and even longer legs. Its ears weren't just tall, they were towering. The thing looked like someone had grabbed it by the top of his head and pulled it. What the hell is that? Usopp questioned, stepping back. Another creature was soon to emerge, and this one was a bear, with its body stretched upwards like a giraffe. Is that a human? Chopper questioned with a sweat drop at the white bear which simply passed before them. No, that's a bear. A human can't be that furry, Sanji answered, looking around at the other handful of animals which were lurking nearby. They're all tall, Nami observed too, with eyes wide in awe. It's like someone grabbed them and yanked them skyward. Robin nodded. Perhaps it's a climate effect. Or maybe evolution works differently here. Or maybe it's cursed, Usopp muttered under his breath, but he refused to be a coward and run towards the ship or even hide behind Luffy or Zoro or Sanji. He hadn't been able to do anything, he wasn't stronger to do anything when Luffy. Hey, Luffy called out, cheerful yet sudden. He was stretching his arms and legs absurdly high like the island's animals in mimicry. She. Look, I am one of them now, tall and stretchy, he grinned, bending his body into exaggerated rubbery poses. Luffy, don't, Sanji shouted, jogging forward. Stop messing around, you're not fully healed. Chopper squeaked, panic rising in his chest. Luffy, you're not supposed to use your powers so much yet, what if something happens? Zoro watched quietly, his brows furrowing. His eyes followed every wobble, every flinch, every time Luffy's leg bent a little too much or his shoulders slumped just a little too low. He didn't say a word, even though it was scaring him, but he kept walking behind Luffy, just in an arm's distance, ready to catch him if he fell. "I'm fine," Luffy called out cheerfully to all the worries of the crew. But the next second, he toppled backward dramatically in Zoro's steadying hands, then bounced back upright, still grinning like the world didn't weigh a thing. "I'm fine. You guys worried too much. I've never felt better."
That was a lie. It didn't even reach his eyes. "Just don't overdo it," Sanji muttered, watching as the animals didn't mind Luffy at all, and instead gathered near him. He wondered if being a god made him recognizable to all living things, even when the mortal shell of his was barely holding it all together.
Robin, who was observing Luffy and the animals, tilted her head slightly. "Looks like the animals know what he is innately." "I think so too," Chopper responded, having felt that same feeling when he had first felt Luffy. The crew kept wandering deeper into the endless plains, their footsteps leaving soft indentations in the grass, while the landscape remained the same green, vast and peaceful with some tall trees scattered here and there. "This island is so empty," Nami muttered. "There are no houses." "Then where do those animals live?" Chopper questioned, still craning his neck to watch a particularly wobbly giraffe-stork hybrid. "There," Luffy shouted suddenly, pointing toward a structure in the distance. "I see something, a house. Let's race there," and without waiting for a reply, again, he took off running. "Oi, damn it, Luffy," Sanji groaned, sprinting after him. "You idiot, didn't I just say to not overdo things?" "TCH," Zoro smirked, as he followed too, not at full speed, but enough to keep pace, with his hands still resting casually on his swords. Behind them, Chopper and Usopp tried to keep up but Street, "Is he so fast, when he's not even completely well?" Usopp gasped. "His legs look like jelly," Chopper whined, just a little ahead of Usopp. "He's gonna fall any second," he said, even though he knew that Zoro and Sanji would help him up or catch him before his face hit the ground, and he was sure that Luffy knew that. Meanwhile, Nami and Robin strolled behind at their pace, keeping an eye out for their captain. When Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji finally arrived at the modest wooden cottage nestled in a slight dip in the grassland, they found Luffy already circling a horse. Except for the fact that it wasn't a normal horse. It was elegant. Too elegant. Its legs were long and arched like stilts, and its mane flowed like mist. The creature bowed its long neck to Luffy, who giggled like a child and petted its fur gently. "Woo-ah, you're so cool, can I ride you, Sherry?" Luffy excitedly chirped. Sherry neighed once, approvingly. Its body didn't stiffen at his touch. In fact, it leaned into him like it recognized something divine. The rest of the crew caught up seconds later. Chopper immediately gasped in awe, eyes sparkling. "Oh wow, can I pet it? Hello? What's her name?" The horse nickered, shaking its mane. Luffy pointed. "She says her name's Sherry." "You can talk to horses now?" Usopp asked, blinking. "I always could." Luffy laughed again, scratching Sherry's ears as the horse leaned into him. Meanwhile, Zoro stepped past the animal and looked toward the cottage. "House is empty," he announced after a glance through the window. "Someone lives here, though," Usopp said thoughtfully, pointing at the saddle and the neat feed bucket. "There's signs of life." Luffy stopped scratching Sherry and looked up suddenly, before his red eyes lit in the sunlight to almost golden, making it look as if the sun itself was residing in his eyes and sparkled. "There's someone," he pointed towards two tall bamboo shoots reaching towards the sky. "He's up there. I can feel him." Zoro followed his gaze, his fingers twitched, and before anyone could blink, he drew one blade in a smooth, casual motion. With a flash of steel and a clean swipe, he sliced the bamboo split in half, leading something to fall down with a loud yelp. It was an old man who rolled onto the grass with a grunt, his robes flailing and a conch shell hat flopping off his head. He lay there for a moment before sitting up, dazed. "Is that a genie that appears when you break the bamboo?" Luffy questioned, curiously. "A genie? Is that even real?" Zoro questioned back. "Yeah, maybe," Luffy chirped, not even sure himself. "It's the thing that appears after you break the bamboo stick?" "Who even told you about this?" Zoro's sweat dropped. "Dad read to me at night sometimes," Luffy grinned, almost proudly, his eyes twinkling at the memory. "Dragon did?" Zoro blinked, having not taken the man to be that caring. Before Luffy could respond, a groan from the grass dragged their attention back to the old man, who was still entangling his limbs and dusting off his oversized conch shell hat. He squinted at the two who casually brought him back to the earth and are now arguing about bedtime stories. "What in the blue hells are you two mumbling about?" The man croaked, adjusting his hat with both hands. "Did you just call me a genie?" The rest of the crew fell into a moment of silence, their eyes narrowing at the bizarrely cheerful man who just dropped out of the clouds.
While Luffy, now squatting next to the man, tilted his head. "I thought you were one."
The old man blinked at him, like he wasn't sure if he should be amused or tell a lie to keep the childish fantasy of the kid before him. His mouth opened, but before he could speak again, the rest of the crew stepped forward, cautious and curious. "Who exactly are you?" Sanji asked, his eyes narrowing. The man looked up at them and suddenly broke into a toothy grin, his eyes crinkling. "Long time no see, you lot doing alright?" "Wait, do we know him?" Usopp Stage whispered to the group. The crew all turned to look at each other. "Not ringing any bells," Chopper added, shaking his head with wide eyes. "Never seen him in my life," Robin said smoothly with her arms folded. "Same here," Nami said, just as confused. "Nope," Zoro said with a deadpan voice. "Definitely not," Luffy agreed. The old man blinked. "Ah, makes sense, no wonder I haven't seen you before." "That's the opposite of what you just said," Usopp muttered, his eyes twitching. "Who even are you?" "Ah, right, sorry," the man chuckled, then bowed his head slightly. "The name's Tonjit, and thank you kindly for getting me down from that stilt." Sanji raised an eyebrow. "You're on stilts?" "Indeed," Tonjit said, striking a proud pose. "Been up there for 10 whole years." 10 years? Chopper squeaked, nearly jumping out of his hooves. "That's so unhealthy, did you even come down to eat?" "I had cheese," Tonjit said cheerfully. "That does not answer the question," Nami deadpanned. "You were stuck there for 10 years? Usopp asked incredulously. "Why didn't you just come down yourself?" Tonjit sighed deeply. "Oh, I wanted to. But the bamboo was too tall and the ground was so far away, so I just stayed up there. You get used to it. It's quite peaceful." "Sounds more like a prison than peace," Sanji muttered. Zoro leaned on one hip, one hand still casually on his sword hilt, watching the old man with narrowed eyes. "You're telling us you willingly stayed up there for 10 years? "Oh, I didn't plan to, but I got attached. It became a lifestyle, you know." Tonjit smiled with a surprising amount of pride. "Plus, the view is fantastic. Clouds below your feet, birds as neighbors, what more could you want?" "Freedom," Robin offered. "Groundedness," Sanji said flatly. "A bed," Nami added with a grimace. "Snacks?" Luffy raised his hand like a schoolkid. "Clouds taste weird." "Wait, you ate clouds?" Usopp blinked. "Only the puffy ones." "What's the deal with this island?" Robin questioned curiously, pointing towards the tall animals. "The thing about this island," he said, arms spread wide, "is that it's a place of freedom. The animals stretch tall because they can. The grass grows wild because it wants to. Whoever lives here starts feeling it in their bones." Robin tilted her head, intrigued. "Fascinating, a naturally occurring environmental anomaly that influences growth?" "Or a curse," Usopp muttered. Tonjit clapped his hands once. Come, you've helped an old man back to earth. At least let me offer you something in return. I've got cheese inside." The crew followed with mixed expressions, the Straw Hats filing into the small wooden cottage behind Tonjit. The place was rustic, with wooden walls, tall windows, a collection of strange seashells strung across the ceiling like wind chimes, and a suspiciously large cheese wheel sitting atop a rickety table like a shrine. Tonjit clapped his hands together. "It's aged to perfection, 10-year-old cheese, handcrafted during the first week I climbed my stilts." Luffy's eyes sparkled. "Woo, 10-year cheese? I want to try it?" Whack! Sanji's hand shot out like lightning and smacked Luffy's reaching hand away before it could even graze the moldy cheese. "No," Sanji barked. "Don't you even dare." Zoro stepped forward, hand resting on a blade, his face twisted in horror. "You want to feed us 10-year-old cheese?" Tonjit blinked. "It's perfectly aged. It's perfectly lethal," Sanji snapped. "Hey now," the old man laughed good-naturedly. "You kids don't know good cheese when you see it." "We also don't want to die," Sanji snapped again. Tonjit huffed, clearly offended, and took a slice of cheese for himself, popping it into his mouth like candy. His face didn't change. Still good." Luffy leaned into Zoro's ear. "What if he is a genie and the cheese is magic?" Zoro gave him the flattest look humanly possible. "Then let him fly us off this stupid island." The midday sun was bathing the beach in golden warmth, casting long, lazy shadows across the smooth sand of the Long Island's coast. Waves were lapping gently at the shore in a rhythm that seemed content and slow, like the world had finally taken a deep breath and chosen to take a rest. Overhead, a few puffy clouds lazed about in the bright sky, content to drift and watch the antics below. The Straw Hat Pirates were scattered along the beach in varying states of relaxation, chaos and getting sunburned. They had chosen to spend the break of their journey in the embrace of the ocean, get some rest in the wide and inviting beach, away from the marines, warlords and other pirates breathing down their necks. The old man named Tonjit, but called Gramps by Luffy, and the cheerful and lovely horse Sherry had been roped into this impromptu beach day by none other than Luffy himself. He had invited them along, mostly because, as Luffy had loudly declared earlier that morning, "If I can't eat that cheese you gave me, then you gotta come and eat Sanji's cooking instead." Indeed, Sanji had taken it as a personal challenge to make Luffy forget the cheese the old man was offering, mostly because he was afraid of how a decade-old cheese would affect his captain. because he certainly refused to lose the grinning idiot to food poisoning of all things. And so, here they all were. The sun hung high above them and the sea sparkled with a strange energy, almost like it was too happy. There were no enemies, no rush. Just the blue skies, the lapping waves, the cherry laughters, and the rarest treasure of all, peace. And the best of all was Luffy's laughter, which was resounding, bringing peace and joy. Despite the clear worry in the eyes of his crew, he was running, skipping and laughing. He had climbed on top of Zoro's broad shoulders and declared himself the king of the beach. He was wearing a lightweight red open hoodie, which was draped over his sun-kissed shoulders, the fabric thin and breezy, just enough to keep the sun from roasting his skin without smothering him in heat, not that it was needed. The sleeves hung loosely around his arms, rolled a little at the elbows. Underneath, he wore nothing at all, letting the sea breeze roll over his slender, bare chest. His blue shorts were simple and rugged, frayed a bit at the edges, perfect for wading into the tides or sprinting across the sand. His iconic straw hat sat jauntily atop his head, tilted slightly to the side as he clung to Zoro's shoulders like a little monkey. "Zoro, go faster," Luffy grinned, giggling, kicking his heels like he was enjoying every moment of it. "I ain't a damn horse," Zoro grumbled, though he still trudged across the beach with Luffy on his shoulders, dodging flung seaweed, the occasional wet sandball from the sniper of their crew and the hurled insults and the occasional water balloons from Sanji. "Oi, mosshead, stop encouraging him, make me, love cook. Tag. You're it," Chopper squealed, racing past with flailing arms and a wild laugh, only to trip over his own hooves and faceplant in the sand. Robin watched from under a parasol, a cocktail glass of chilled pineapple juice in her hand, one elegant leg crossed over the other. She was smiling faintly, occasionally glancing toward Luffy, eyes warm. Nami, meanwhile, sat on a large beach towel with her back to the breeze, polishing her orange-painted toenails and keeping count of Luffy's laughter. He was laughing a lot today. That was good. Her gaze slid over to where Sanji had set up a full beach barbecue. Smoke curled up from the grill, and the scent of roasted meat, fish skewers, and spiced pineapples wafted over. She sighed. He was doing his best, and she had to admit, it all looked incredibly delicious. But maybe after this beach party, there won't be much left in their pantry, but for now, they didn't have to worry. They had acquired huge sacks of gold from Skypia, which needed to be cashed out later. Her eyes softened as she watched Luffy leap off Zoro's back, land on the sand in a roll, and come up beaming. "Oi, Sanji, I want chicken legs. All of them." Sanji saluted with a pair of tongs teasingly. "Anything for you, Captain." "EHHH. What about me?" Usopp complained. "You get whatever's left, liar boy," Sanji said sweetly. Meanwhile, Tonjit, wearing a ridiculous hat far too big for his head, was starting to tell whoever was listening to him, mainly Chopper, Robin and Usopp, about an ancient breed of sea rabbits while Sherry practiced skimming shells across the tide using her mouth. Luffy saw her and raced over, excited by the idea itself. "Let's find shells," he announced. "Huh?" Chopper blinked. "Competition time," Luffy declared, puffing out his chest. "Whoever gets the prettiest seashells wins." "Winner gets what?" Usopp asked, suspicious. Luffy thought for a moment. "All the ice cream Sanji made." "You didn't even ask me," Sanji screamed from behind the grill. But it was too late. Chopper had already transformed into his smaller form and dashed toward the waves, while Usopp used his sniper goggles to scan the beach. Luffy took off at a run, bare feet slapping against wet sand. But unlike the others, someone had an edge, and that someone was none other than Luffy, whose mother was the sea. She was already carrying small, pearly, beautiful shells closer to his path, rolling them gently within his reach like an offering, like a gift. No one noticed it, not a single soul present on the beach saw as Luffy cheated his way through the self-proclaimed competition unknowingly. By the time the competition ended, if it could even be called that, Luffy was holding a massive pile of vibrant, multicolored seashells in the hem of his top, far more than Chopper, Sherry and Usopp combined. They were even glimmering, almost glowing. Look, he grinned, running to Chopper and Usopp. "Beat that." Chopper stared at Luffy's hoard in awe. "How did you find so many? I only found 3. "I got 5, Usopp mumbled. "But I let you win, as captain, you know." Luffy didn't reply. He just beamed and flopped down on the towel next to Nami, scattering some of the shells onto her feet. "Oi, you're getting sand all over me, hey, sorry." But she didn't sound too mad, especially not when Chopper started adorning the shells into Luffy's hair with giggles. Robin joined in, weaving tiny ones into the straw hat band. "There," she said. "Fit for a king." "Pirate king," Luffy corrected, cheeks stretching wide, and beaming at the attention. "You look like a festival float," Zoro commented, dropping down beside them, while tossing Luffy a bottle of juice. Luffy caught it and grinned. "Thanks, Zoro." The swordsman didn't answer, but his eye lingered on the soft look on Luffy's face for a second longer than usual, trying to find if he was truly okay now. He looked that way, but Zoro could still see the slight abnormalities in his posture and grin. Sanji finally called them over for food, laying out plates on a long table made from driftwood. Everything looked perfect. Grilled meats, fruit skewers, fried dumplings, a massive bowl of ice cream for the seashell winner and a whole carved watermelon. "Eat to your heart's content, everyone," Sanji said with a bow. Luffy sat in the middle, cheeks puffed with meat, surrounded by the others. Nami scolded him to slow down. Chopper kept wiping his face with a napkin, trying to get rid of the sand. Usopp tried to steal from his plate. Zoro drank straight from a bottle and got yelled at. Robin made sure Luffy had enough rice. At some point, Sherry had a coconut with a flower straw in her mouth and brought it to Luffy from the table. "For you," she nazzed giddily. Luffy took it with both hands. "Yay, thanks, Sherry." The old man chuckled, sipping his own drink. "This crew's something else." "They're mine," Luffy said simply. "My nakama." The laughter of the Straw Hat crew continued to echo faintly through the cover, caught in the arms of the sea breeze and carried over the gentle rise and fall of the waves. Luffy had just decked a skewer of fish and a mango slice, earning a mock gasp from Usopp and a resigned sign from Nami. He was even about to take a sip of Zoro's sake, when Sanji decisively switched it with another drink. Zoro could only grumble threats in retaliation. The sun was still lazily sinking on the horizon, dipping low like a sleepy lantern, nearly out of fuel but not wanting to go away yet. It was a wonderful day, filled with laughter and cheers even if the start was one heck of an ordeal. But even amid the joy, a slight twitch passed through Luffy's fingers as he held the skewer. His head tilting a fraction, his eyes lidding ever so slightly. He felt it. A presence. Not heavy like rage, not dark like hatred, but cold, calm and absolute. A low protective hum built in his chest once again. That faint, indistinct drum of the world that echoed in his heart, beating ever so beautifully, wanting to beat louder and louder and louder. But Luffy calmed it out, his golden eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat, unseen by others, and just for a breath of time, the winds, the clouds, the waves, everything around him sharpened. Because out there, just beyond the horizon, was a bike, pedaling leisurely across the ocean's surface as though it were solid earth with mud and dirt. A tall figure was approaching. His coat was draped loosely over his shoulders, head ducked against the light, and his eyes hidden behind tinted round glasses. From afar, he just looked like a lazy tourist with ice fruit powers enjoying a slow ride across the ocean. But Luffy knew better, and what he saw wasn't just a man, it was an admiral in flesh. Approaching them. Gauging them from afar, studying their every move. Ice wasn't merely coating his path, it was obeying him. The sea was stiffening beneath each tire turn, crystalline and flawless. And though Nika's mother naturally rippled to meet her son, she hesitated around this man, almost contemplative. As if she didn't want the man, the marine, to be anywhere near Luffy. Luffy's brows furrowed as he studied the man, his eye flashing gold, letting him see more than what should be humanly possible. Aokiji now follows lazy justice. He had once followed fired up justice, which he changed after seeing all the injustices committed by the world government itself. But still, Luffy flattened his aura. He made his presence small. His haki, flowing and leaking, retreated behind layers of silence. Though seated between Zoro and Chopper, the change in Luffy was sudden. The silence was chilling, and Robin noticed it first. She cast him a sideways glance, studying the now still Luffy, whose straw hat had dipped lower to shadow his eyes. "Luffy?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, but Chopper suddenly stiffened beside him. He could feel his fur rise. Did the temperature drop just now? Zoro lifted his head from where it had rested on his arms, looking up at the sky to find the clouds hiding the sun, and then scanning the sea. Someone's coming. His hand rested on his katana immediately, ready to protect and kill. At that moment, Usopp's voice piped up nervously, is that guy riding a bicycle across the ocean?" Sanji stopped mid-sip of a tropical drink. Nami frowned. The old man blinked. Sherry tilted her head, and Robin, she stiffened. The man was pedaling closer now, nonchalant, unhurried, as though the vast sea wasn't beneath him. As if he had no appointment, and was following no mission. As though he were out on a vacation. Yet no one could ignore the faint, unnatural chill that now tinged their skin. "He's wearing a marine coat," Nami whispered, her voice sharp. That word alone snapped the Straw Hats into a quiet but immediate alert. They didn't want to deal with Marines right now. "Something wrong with the Marines?" the old man, Tonjit, questioned, looking around in confusion. No one answered. Zoro's jaw tightened. Sanji slowly slid off his seat and stood tall. Usopp's words were stuck in his throat, his fear was taking hold. Even Robin's fingers were hovering, every muscle of her prepared to summon limbs from the sand. "Relax, guys," Luffy finally spoke. He didn't want to fight just yet, but if the Admiral came for them, he was going to fight with everything he got minus his godly powers and haki, of course. Each of the Straw Hats did their best to look relaxed, unconcerned with the new arrival. They even sat back down in exaggerated ways, like actors caught mid-scene. Usopp was smiling too widely, all the while sweating. Chopper had nervously buried himself in the fruit bowl, trying not to pay attention to the marine. It was painfully awkward. Luffy still hadn't moved, but his eyes remained on the man now less than 50 meters away. Kuzan, one of the 3 admirals, also known as Admiral Aokiji, or Aokiji the Blue Pheasant. Not a threat yet, but maybe in the future. Kuzan finally rolled onto the beach. The ice under his tires stopped forming as soon as they hit sand. He pedaled a little further before slowing to a graceful halt, swinging one long leg off the bicycle and walking it lazily up the sand. Not a word was exchanged. Not a rush to his step. He just glanced at the group with a sleepy sort of squint, then leaned the bicycle against a tall tree and turned slightly, facing the crew but making no threatening move. His voice was low, lazy but strangely polite. "I hate to interrupt you all. Go on, continue having fun. I'm just taking a small break from biking for so long. Also," his head tilted, his gaze sweeping each of them. "Is this everyone? I expected more people." That sentence hit like a thunderclap, making half of them shudder and stiffen in realization. He knew. He knew about the newspaper, the reports, the whispers of the 3 seas, the G-8 chaos and the storm. The man knew. Luffy remained seated for a few more seconds, before standing up. His hat was still casting a long shadow across his face, concealing the glint of gold in his now normally red eyes. But his smile bloomed like mischief incarnate as he stepped out ahead of the crew. "Hey," he grinned, voice loud and chirpy. "You're the cold guy my old Gramps told me about. What are you doing here?" Kuzan didn't react instantly. For the first time, something in his jaw flexed. He had expected posturing. Fear, like Robin was showing. Maybe a confrontation like the swordsman and the blonde-haired teen looked ready to have. Not this. Barefoot kid who shouldn't be looking this happy in front of an admiral like him. Maybe the kid did not recognize him as an admiral. He supposes he could use that to his benefit. Kuzan stared, and Luffy stared back, head tilted. The silence stretched, not hostile, but too thick to be easy. Kuzan's brows drew down slightly. He couldn't read the kid. He couldn't place his posture. It wasn't normal. It wasn't strong or weak or defiant or submissive. It was just there. It was chaotic. Almost dangerous. But for the love of his ice, he couldn't figure out anything properly. Yet, he refused to show his frustration. Instead, he let out a low, thoughtful breath and scratched the back of his head, his voice mild. "Oh, I can only wonder what he said," Kuzan murmured, knowing completely well that the kid was referring to Garp. Hopefully nothing too embarrassing. Luffy tilted his head, that mysterious grin spreading across his face again, looking toothy, boyish and impossible to pin down completely. It was almost unfair how much warmth it held. But Kuzan wasn't paying attention to just the smile. It was the way the boy's mouth moved. It was like deja vu for the Ice Admiral. "Ararara," the ice user breathed. "You really do smile just like your grandpa." That necessarily didn't mean a compliment, but there was an odd shift in the air, almost imperceptible, but there and the crew felt it. Something invisible coiling in the atmosphere, cool and dry, like breath over fresh ice. Kuzan turned his head, then, his eyes, cold and lazy, slid toward one person in particular.
Nico Robin, the devil child. The woman, who was already breathing sharply and was already half into panic mode, winked to calm her down. Even so, her eyes never left the admiral's. Her fingers were trembling, barely visible. Every muscle in her body was screaming at her to flee, to run, but she didn't move. She couldn't move, not even an inch. She had this tiny hope that Aokiji won't say anything about her, but seeing the look in his eyes, that hope vanished.
"Anyway," Kuzan said, voice lazier than it had any right to be, "your little piece won't last with her around." That was the moment everything stopped. Robin inhaled sharply, and the others reacted instantly.
Zoro's swords were unsheathed before his next breath. Sanji's cigarette hissed as it hit the sand, his leg coiled to strike. Chopper scrambled to shield Robin's side with wide eyes, finally understanding the cause of her fear. Nami stepped in front of her, her climatact clenched in her fists, her stance not combat-ready but defensive. Even Usopp had his slingshot drawn and loaded with steady fingers, those shaky legs.
None of them said anything. They didn't need to. The sheer conviction in their movements was enough. But still they were confused by Robin's reaction towards the man, but they didn't utter a word. While Robin stood frozen behind them all, her eyes wide. Kuzan made no move to attack. He merely observed, still slouched, still casual and lazy. As if this were nothing more than a visit to a beach stall. But even though his words came measured and cold. Everyone around her, he began, has ended up wiped out. She is the sole survivor, he continued, with the sound of sand hissing under a shifting boot being the only interruption. Time and time again. She flees. She leaves. She runs. She's run from the Marines, from bounty hunters, from kingdoms and captains, and now she has run here. Robin's hands shook harder. "You may think she's a quiet, gentle, good woman," Kuzan uttered. "But I have seen it. I've seen what's left in her wake every time. Whole ships burning. Men turned to stone by the fear of her name. A demon. An unfortunate woman. A walking bad omen. That's what she is, he nonchalantly proclaims. And one day, he added, you'll regret having her with you. The words weren't angry, they weren't vengeful, they were factual. Zoro's grip on Wado had tightened. Sanji's eyes had lost their usual fire and turned to steel. Nami was pale. Chopper visibly quivered in anger. Usopp visibly frowned. But Luffy was still standing there, his hands in the pocket, hat tilted low, face still unreadable. He hadn't flinched even once. He hadn't even looked surprised, as if he knew it all from the very beginning. And yet none of the Straw Hats could understand why he wasn't reacting. Why wasn't he already shouting, defending, screaming like he always did when someone got hurt? Robin, who was now outright shaking, bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. Why? Why was he quiet? Why? Did he argue? Did he know? Luffy was calm, unnaturally calm. But inside his bones, inside his heart and soul, something rattled. The kind that didn't boil like anger but coiled like a storm cloud, waiting for the right crack of thunder. He knew this wasn't about Robin. Not really. The man cared enough about her, even if slightly. Kuzan's tone was too steady. His body language too loose. The weight of his haki, though subtle, wasn't oppressive, it was a test, and Luffy hated tests. He held on, he really did try, but he was tired. He was sore. He was at the end of his short patience, which he had earned through his past life's loneliness and the family's training. Luffy clicked his tongue and tilted his head. Can you shut up already? He said, loud enough to break the tension like glass. Who cares about all that crap? The crew blinked, even Robin gasped as Luffy stepped forward, finally lifting his head enough for his straw hat to reveal the firelight in his eyes, not glowing gold but burning steadily red. Robin is part of my crew, he declares. And she's under my protection. He jabbed a finger forward. She ain't someone to be thrown away. She's cool. She knows all sorts of things about rocks and ancient stories. His foot hit the sand hard. If you don't shut up, I'll shut you up, since no one talks to my friends like that. Robin's lips trembled. She had felt sick while Aokiji was talking crap, but now she was filled with hope once again, from Luffy, who was standing up for her right to stay in the crew, even if the way is by killing her old savior. Her lips trembled, but she steadied herself, trying to clutch. Hands erupted from the ground. The sand beneath Kuzan bloomed with 30 pale arms that snaked around his limbs, spine and shoulder, before cracking it with a horrifying sound, resulting in the Admiral's body shattering like a statue, with ice shards flying into the air. For one breath, no one moved, that is, until Usopp freaked out. Robin just assassinated a Marine. An Admiral to be exact, Luffy interrupted with a grin, though knowing that the man wasn't finished. What the fuck? Robin just assassinated an Admiral. We're gonna die? Usopp screamed at the top of his lungs, making everyone in the area, except Luffy, who was laughing loudly, start panicking. Did you kill him? The old man questioned, horrified and already planning to escape. He liked the company of the group, but well, he needed to run now. We need to run, Nami shrieked. He exploded into cubes. Cubes. Chopper shouted, panicking like a headless chicken. Sanji grabbed the grill. Chopper grabbed the first aid kit. Zoro looked at Robin, then at the pile of ice, his sword half drawn. But then from behind them, a soft crunching sound came from the shattered pieces. A blue mist swirled before the ice reformed, and bit by bit, like puzzle pieces guided by an invisible hand, Kuzan reassembled limb by limb, until he stood whole again, brushing a flake of snow from his coat sleeve. GHOSSTTT, Usopp, Chopper and Nami shouted at once. But Aokiji didn't give them any thought as he just bent slightly, plucked a handful of wild grass growing near the palm tree and then straightened. He lifted the blades, then breathed on them. The air crystallized around the leaves, the cold blooming outward in beautiful, deadly veins, and from them, he pulled a jagged ice saber. Blue, glinting, and whispering frost into the wind. Robin took a step back along with Usopp, Chopper and Nami, while Zoro, Sanji and Luffy stood before them like a shield, ready to protect. Kuzan didn't raise the blade, he didn't threaten anyone with it. Not yet, but he simply considered. After all, he had seen Robin join and leave crews without any hesitation. He had seen her getting discarded, when the crew faced enemies, or almost getting sold to the Marines for mere berries on her head. He still remembered the names of the latter who had tried to turn her in. Captains who had sold her for bounty slips. Mercenaries who looked at her with hunger in their eyes. Friends who had turned the moment it was profitable. He had watched her learn to survive by severing trust, to step away before others could step away from her. Again and again, she fled, she ran, destroying the crews and organizations she had joined prior. Maybe he was doing a favor to her now. Maybe testing this crew, the Straw Hat Pirates' capabilities and willingness to protect Robin, wasn't just for the sake of duty. Maybe it was for the truth of what happened in the G8 base this morning. Maybe by pressurizing these individuals, he could get the 3 Cs to come out, because he has his suspicions about the 3 Cs being somehow allied with this small group of pirates, especially the captain. But now that Kuzan was looking at Robin, she seemed different than all the other times, especially with the people surrounding her. Standing for her. Vowing to protect her. But how long would the crew hold her? Or would they break soon? Would the line of defense the three people drop to their knees and run? Leave Robin like the others had done? The Ice Admiral let the tip of his ice saber trail along the sand as he took a step forward. Just one measured stride of stealth, no effort to catch them by surprise. He simply walked, each step unnaturally silent. He wanted to just test the waters today. He wanted to see what the crew before him was willing to risk in order to protect Robin. He wanted to see the courage in the one standing in front of Robin. 3 people. Swordsman, captain and cook. The former green-haired swordsman, Roronoa Zoro, had his blades drawn low, his eyes steady and fixated at her. The latter blonde-haired cook, Sanji, stood with his cigarette gone and his foot twitching, like he was waiting for a reason to attack. And the captain, Monkey D. Luffy, stood at the center, still with his hat shadowing his eyes, with no fighting stance, no fists clenched. But every fiber of the air around him buzzed. Kuzan, with a warning, moved. Not with killing intent, nothing close to that, but his form vanished in a soft burst of wind and reappeared mid-dash, coat fluttering behind him. His saber rose, not to kill, not yet, but to test blunt and aimed for Robin's shoulder with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Yet, before the blade could reach her, a blade of steel met his saber with such force that the impact hissed like a hot blade dipped into ice water. Sparks flew as the pirate hunter stood firm in the admiral's path, the edge of his katana meeting the frozen blade head-on. His gaze was burning and Kuzan had to blink at what he found. The man was trying to use his haki. It wasn't much, not yet. It wasn't focused, not honed, but it was there. A subtle pressure leaking from the swordsman's frame, which he truly hadn't expected from someone who hadn't even touched the new world. "That's interesting," he muttered aloud, voice still slow and mellow, but now tinged with curiosity. But his moment of stillness was shattered as Sanji came barreling in from the left. There was no time wasted, as the chef launched into a blinding spin, the back of his foot catching the length of Kuzan's ice saber mid-turn, exploding the saber under the force, with its shards flying like glass in the sun. "You don't get to lay a finger on her, Admiral or not," Sanji snapped, his voice sharp like broken flint, as he landed beside Zoro. Zoro, still holding his sword out, let out a low breath and added coolly, "Try again. I'll cut that stick of yours to the hilt next time." "Ararara. Fiery, aren't you?" Kuzan muttered, almost amused. The 2 men didn't answer, but instead stood to attack once again, only for the captain who had been standing still all this while to break the silence. The kid captain had shouted a command, one not born out of desperation but out of knowledge. "Don't touch him, don't let him touch you." Perhaps the kid's grandfather had told him about his abilities too. Kuzan had barely turned when he saw the blur of motion, of Luffy shooting across the space like a spring let loose without warning, his body stretching mid-air, looping around his crewmates. He had snagged Robin first, then Sanji and Zoro in quick succession, before they could even make any contact with him. And before anyone could process it, they were airborne, twisting and spinning through the air in a controlled fall. "Whoa. Luffy." Zoro cursed. What the hell?" Sanji croaked. Luffy twisted his body to take the brunt of the impact, shielding them in his grip with such calculated care that none of them hit the ground hard, the sand scattering beneath them like smoke. His arms were trembling as he held them all. His bones were screaming he wasn't healed yet, but he gritted his teeth and refused to show any of it. The landing cratered the beach behind them, but Luffy rolled with the momentum, arms tightening until the last jolt passed through his back and not theirs. The crew had landed in a heap of limbs and tangled breaths, and Luffy, breathless but grinning, sat up with sand in his hair and dust on his skin. The others looked at him in shock, not from the fall but from the realization of what fate they had been rescued from. Robin gasped, her face pale. Zoro scowled, his brow furrowed in silent questions. Sanji cursed under his breath, looking back toward where they'd been moments ago. "Luffy." Chopper whispered from the side, wanting to check Luffy. But Luffy wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking at the ones he'd missed. Nami. Chopper had already begun running at his command, but the others hadn't. Yet, someone was missing. And it was none other than Usopp, who was running, flailing wildly, ducking behind rocks as waves of cold mist surged after him. The sniper was trying to scramble away, still talking to himself, stumbling over beach towels and half-eaten coconuts. "I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I knew it. He's an ice zombie, a glacial ghost." Behind him, Kuzan followed, not running, just walking. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look focused. He looked as if he were following a strayed chicken to its family through a garden. But Luffy knew better, even if Kuzan wasn't trying to kill. Not yet. His movements were too calculated, but still something about the way the Admiral's fingers twitched with every misfire sent warning bells screaming in Luffy's skull. Because somewhere Luffy had realized that the Admiral now knew that even Usopp could access observation haki, since quite a few times he dodged hits from the Ice Admiral without even looking. Even though it wasn't clean, it wasn't graceful, but enough. His legs were scrambling with the desperation of prey, but his body twisted and ducked exactly when the ice slashed too close. Luffy watched, his mouth parting slightly, before turning into a smile. "Way to go, Usopp," he cheered on. The observation haki was weak, barely there, but it had started to bloom. He needs to up Usopp's exercises soon. Maybe adding 2 or more rounds. Usopp screamed, startling Luffy out of his pride upon his sniper. The guy had pulled his slingshot, trying to launch a pellet that bounced harmlessly off the admiral's chest. But as a result, his own legs got tangled mid-stride and with a yelp, he had crashed face first into the sand. Usopp! Luffy rushed to get up, but it was already too late. The cold had caught him before he could even rise. He moved fast, first the ankle, then his legs, then his chest. The frost raced like wildfire across Usopp's body until, within seconds, Usopp was locked in place, frozen, preserved with his mouth open in mid-yell, expression frozen in pure terror. And amidst it all, Kuzan treaded forward, towards the frozen icicle of Usopp. His intentions clearly written on his face. Robin screamed in terror, scared for Usopp. "Usopp," Chopper gasped. "Oi, don't you dare," Zoro shouted, but was interrupted by none other than the Admiral monster. "Look," Aokiji started, glancing sideways at Robin. "Now because of you, one of your crewmates has turned to ice." Just a breath away from being shattered. His foot hovered over Usopp's chest, not pressing too hard yet. It was like he was testing her, measuring her resolve. But the horror in her eyes and the panicky breath rising in her chest was all too much to tell. Robin was horrified. Every part of her felt like it was reliving the last day of Ohara. Ice beneath her feet. Flames on the sea. Her mother calling for her from behind collapsing buildings. All of it, here again, echoing in this man's presence. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" Kuzan asked, quietly. "Is this what you want to happen again? Because it will. You always attract it." He was waiting for Robin to run, to abandon this crew too, but he could see her hesitate. He could see the shaky wool of her wanting to stay with the crew. "Her new friends, and now because of you, someone else is gonna die once again," he said, his voice slipping into a whisper before his foot began to fall. He never saw Robin or Luffy move, but the former's limbs instantly bloomed from his back like flowers from snow. Cease fleur. Restraint. 6 arms latched onto Kuzan's body at once, gripping his shoulders, waist, and legs in a burst of tension. He paused mid-step, body strained. But not resisting yet. Robin gritted her teeth as the contact sent stinging cold crawling up the arms, through the link, and directly into her real body. Her body was screaming in pain, her arms freezing, but she summoned more hands still, lashing out with every ounce of defiance she had left. At the same moment, Luffy had dashed forward, with wind whistling in his ears as he launched across the sand and scooped Usopp's frozen form from under Kuzan's descending leg in one swift, clean motion. Ice crackled where his hands met the frozen surface, but he twisted his body to shield Usopp and found himself flipping backward once midair before planting his feet hard on the far side of the beach. He stopped only when he had fully shielded Usopp beneath his chest, his breathing heavy. "Run!" Luffy's voice snapped through the chaos, loud and absolute. "Take Usopp and Robin with you. I'll be coming soon. I just had to deal with an icy bastard for SEC." Luffy roared to his crew, ordering them. The entire crew hesitated for a moment, more so Sanji and Zoro. For just a moment, the idea of leaving Luffy on his own, again, seemed like treason. But that voice, that command wasn't a request. It was an order, captain's order. Before either could argue, Luffy planted both feet in the sand and with a grunt of effort, rolled Usopp's frozen body like a carefully handled bowling ball across the beach. The form tumbled forward, ice scraping in arcs as it bounced towards the waiting crew, before Sanji caught him before the next rock could crack the outer casing. Luffy exhaled once in relief, before turning his gaze back towards Kuzan, noticing Zoro coming to aid. His hand adjusted the brim of his straw hat slowly, tilting it downward to shadow his face again. It seems his habit from being Cyrus still persisted. He didn't want Kuzan to see his eyes. Not yet. While his smile returned, wide and deceptively light, his stance shifted to something rooted and steady. Zoro jogged back to his side, his swords already drawn and glinting faintly from the sun's last light and his bandana tied back on his head. There was no comment between them. No smirk or cocky promise. But only the quiet understanding of shared resolve. Luffy cracked his knuckles once. 2 on 1, he said casually, seems fair. Kuzan shrugged. His shoulders rolled like water over stone, with no resistance. Sure, he muttered, if you think that helps. Luffy lunged forward, without wasting a single moment. It was clean, controlled and aimed. His fists were coiled back, body low and almost grazing the sand as he shot forward with every intention to break all the bones of the Ice Admiral. But as he neared, he was reminded of a promise: don't use haki. Not in paradise. Not where the world can see ripple in the back of his mind. And so, in the very last fraction of a second, He twisted and redirected the punch into a slide past Kuzan's left arm, evading the Admiral's incoming reach by inches. In doing so, he acted as a distraction. Zoro took that moment to unleash his attack. Oni, three blades arced like meteor trails as Zoro appeared behind Kuzan with his muscles coiled and eyes narrowed. Jiri. The swords cut through the Admiral's body like a heated knife through snow. The ice scattered across the beach as the upper and lower halves of Kuzan fell apart mid-stride, sliding in two directions. But even as the pieces fell, the mists regathered, once again. Not done yet, Luffy growled. The Ice Admiral, at this point, knew that the crew did indeed care for Robin and that the vice versa also seemed to be true. But he still had a lesson to teach to the crew. So, he lunged forward, aiming for Zoro, trying to grab his arm before the swordsman could fall back. Luffy saw it. He didn't think, he just moved. He barreled between them, his fist swinging up with an uppercut that caught Kuzan beneath the ribs just as the Admiral reached for Zoro. The impact had landed clean. Luffy's fist had connected squarely with Kuzan's ribs, freezing it instantly, making his hand look like it was just gloved in ice, jagged and crawling with winter's touch. While Kuzan had staggered back from the blow, not far, but far enough for it to be noticeable, his head turned slowly toward his torso, where the fist had connected. And a bruise was already forming there, faint, purple, spreading like ink through paper. The kind of mark that shouldn't exist, not from someone like Monkey D. Luffy. Not from a boy who couldn't possibly have used hockey. Not from someone whose own hand was frozen upon immediate contact. Garp's grandson. No doubt about that. But that didn't unsettle him. That punch hadn't felt like it was laced with willpower or the beginnings of hockey or any other technique. It felt solid. Grounding. Almost like it had been touched by something far more troublesome. Like sea stone. But Kuzan wasn't given the time to process his thoughts. He didn't have the time to chase it because as he looked up at the boy, he saw steam. The ice that had enveloped Luffy's hand was melting. The heat rising from the boy's skin was unnatural. Maybe the kid ate a devil fruit that consequently raised his body temperatures? Luffy tilted his head slightly, knowing that his opponent was distracted. He took this as a chance and landed a second punch hard in a downward smash that connected with Kuzan's temple in a blow and echoed like thunder through the frozen air. Behind him, Zoro moved too, with no words or warning. Just a flash of steel into the dying light, before his blades sliced clean through the Admiral's arms, severing them mid-pivot, then followed up with a clean cut across both knees. Aokiji could have easily dodged, but that wasn't the point. This was nothing more than a test. He's allowed to be lazy. It's not like Garp would have told Luffy his title as an admiral. He isn't that kind of person. The Admiral's form collapsed like melting ice and snowdrift, arms and legs littering the shore. "We're leaving," Luffy uttered, turning to Zoro with that familiar grin, which didn't reach his eyes. Zoro gave a tight nod. There was no need to say more, because both of them knew this wasn't a win. This was a message. They knew that the man would be back again, but right now wasn't the right time to fight with him. Not with the way they were. Not yet. So, they ran. The Going Merry was already waiting by the shoreline, with Robin and Usopp huddled in a cloak, held between Nami and Chopper in a hug, while Sanji rushed to and fro to provide hot drinks to warm their bodies. Luffy glanced back once towards the ship, where the Ice Admiral stood whole once again, his body reformed and arms folded. He wasn't pursuing them. He simply watched and Luffy watched back, until the island was no longer clearly visible through naked eyes.